I just had to take the scenic route, Maren grumbled as she looked at her dwindling funds. One of the 3 reasons she traveled was to see the sights, to behold all the beautiful majesty of Talim's landscapes. Mission accomplished, she supposed. The valley in which she wandered was pristine. Verdant willows towered upon rolling hills, their branches swaying in a gentle breeze and shading various chittering and cawing creatures. A weaving river separated the slopes, its banks teeming with wildflowers, its body nurturing fish, both their scales and surrounding water glittering in the warm sunshine. The pretty sights didn't exactly help pay the bills, however. In the 2 weeks she'd left home, she hadn't received a single job. Nothing to pay for all the food she'd have to buy, or the extra supplies she'd picked up last week. She'd started her journey with a little over 1,000 credits in her account. She'd expected to travel to smaller towns, do a few odd jobs here and there, and have at least 2,000 credits after her first month of travel. Now, however, she was sitting at just under 600 credits. Not the end of the world, but far from her initial projections. And she was still a full day's hike from her destination, capital of the nation of Talim, the largest city in the province of Neria. Maren had thought upon leaving the road to enjoy a more natural path, that she could reach the capital in about a day, but she'd already been in this valley for 3 whole days. Who'd have thought off-road travel would take so much longer? But she was on a deadline, where all of her goals would be ruined if she didn't meet a certain criteria by the end of the month. She couldn't afford to meander through nature and not even get paid for it. "Help!" a voice called out. Atop the summit of the next hill, separated by the river, a young blonde man came into view. He was sprinting, the blue cloak he wore flowing in his wake and heading directly for the river. Maren paused, blinked, and clung a little tighter to the wool blanket keeping her warm from the cool winter breeze. Had her prayers been answered? Just 10 feet behind the man, 3 things crested the hill. They were humanoid, but 2 of them ran on all 4s, while all sported large, quivering tails. They were colored a strange mix of dull red and beige, with skin that was simultaneously bulbous and goopy. They were inching closer to the man, who was only halfway to the river. One let out a wet, guttural moan from an indentation in its face. Maren's stomach roiled, but she threw down her blanket, tablet, and nylon bag strung from her shoulder. Her dash, as well as the rush of blood beneath her skin, made the cold negligible. She and the stranger reached opposite sides of the river at the same time, though those monstrosities were only a foot behind him. Maren's mouth parched. "Get down!" The man obeyed, diving forward into the river, though he landed on dry ground. Maren spread her arms to the side, her mouth parching more, and with her gift raised the small portion of the river into the air. She gathered the liquid to her side as she sprinted to the farther bank, pulling it along her shoulders. The disgusting beasts reached forward with a dribbling hand. "Eyes on me!" Maren roared. She thrusted her arms forward. The water at her shoulders formed into a long, thin stream that snaked up her bicep, then forearm, then palm. Mouth drying a little more, she focused her power on her palm. 2 thin, highly pressurized streams of water spewed from each hand, directly through the monstrous entities. The one closest to the man backed up a foot, but didn't seem otherwise fazed. Now, thankfully, all 3 beasts faced Maren, though how they could see was beyond her, as there were only small divots in their heads where eyes would be, but nothing actually was there. "Let's try this." Using the same power, Maren created her minuscule palmed geysers and wiped her hands to the side. The resulting stream sliced the 3 monsters in 2. They hit the banks with a wet thump, then twitched. Maren's stomach roiled again. There was something strange about their color, goopy texture and pungent, acidic scent that made her want to hurl. "That was incredible!" the man exclaimed. "And so fast, too!" "Thanks," Maren said, mouth drying further. Sorry, but could you take a couple of steps back? Diverting the river is tiring." "Oh, sorry." The blonde man returned to the bank, keeping his wide eyes on the downed monstrosities. "I'm serious. Those were some wicked moves. You could be a peacekeeper." Maren sighed with relief as she released her gift, letting the water flow normally again. "Thanks, but not really," Maren said. "They have a lot more training than me. Besides, they're too militaristic, too orderly. Guild work suits my taste much better." Not to mention the missions peacekeepers did were almost always life-threatening. At least working in a guild, her jobs could range anywhere from picking up groceries for the elderly all the way to aiding police and peacekeepers in their work. Guilds had less authority on said jobs, but they had a greater amount of freedom to choose what kind of work they wanted. So that's why I'm... Maren reached for her nylon bag, finding only air. Oh right, Maren had left it on the other hill. She grasped her gift yet again, moving the water only in the small areas around her. Saved on energy, which would be important if more of those abominations showed up. What are those things? Maren was no stranger to dangerous situations. In her 18 years, she'd found herself in the middle of firefights, drug busts, and even hostage situations. Working for a guild, especially one of Talim's oldest and most respected ones, often meant she'd become involved in life or death scenarios. It was a life she'd known since she was 5. Even still, she'd never seen something as strange as those abominations. "Thank you, blessed leaper," the blond man said as he walked back to his side of the river. Looked like he composed himself a little. "I don't know what I'd have done without you." "Couldn't let them kill you," Maren said, removing her canteen from her bag. It was tiny, only the size of her thumbnail. She held a small button on the top for a moment, then it expanded to the size of her chest. She took a long, slow draught from it, then sighed. "You know anything about these things?" "No, the man said, stepping back and falling onto his butt. Maren dropped her canteen, facing the... What the? One of the monsters she'd cleaved in twain was on its feet. The two halves were reconnecting, drawn into each other by thick, goopy tendrils. Before it became whole, however, it charged. Maren's mouth began to dry, water forming at her right shoulder. She lunged, sliding her arm from the riverbank to the sky, snaking the liquid down her arm along her palm and focusing it on the tip of her pointer finger, expelled another thin, highly pressurized stream. The water carved through the tendrils, separating the figure and causing the halves to plummet and crush some wildflowers. And for good measure, Maren swiped once, twice, thrice, and more. Now the 3 monstrosities were more like 28. Small tendrils reached from the bits of the other bulbous bodies. "Burn them," the man breathed. "Please, with as much fire as possible." Maren picked up her canteen. "As you can probably tell, fire's not my gift." "You got a fire starter in that pack?" As Maren drank, she eyed the gray chunks. They undulated like a beating heart, those gooey tendrils growing along their flanks. "Tenacious little assholes, aren't they?" she muttered. Thankfully, fire starters were one of the emergency supplies she'd bought last week, so she had plenty. It only took a minute to get a flame blazing, but the tendrils were already beginning to connect with each other. Maren grabbed one, stomach churning as her fingers squelched into the chunk. It was like wet clay that wriggled in her hand. She tossed it into the fire. If this didn't work, the best she could do was take the man and run. The blob sizzled, pulsed violently, and then blackened and shrunk to a crisp. Maren gave the man a radiant smile. "Care to help?" Despite clearly desiring anything but that, the young man joined her in the game of blob tossing into the fire. "So, what are you doing out here?" Maren asked. "And how did you get caught in this mess?" "Live in Linux," the man said, cringing every time he grabbed a piece. "But I got tired of city life, you know? I'm an autonomous member, freedom to go wherever the wind blows you. Though, guess I should visit some Quincher temples, huh?" Maren bit her tongue, as she always did when somebody brought up the Titanian church. Then she mumbled, "Pray to whomever you want. That's the freedom you're given." With the look he gave her, one might think she'd not only saved his life, but his soul. "Anyway," he continued, "there's so much more than the city. So I finally did it. Quit my job, collected my savings, and went hiking." "How long before these found you?" Maren asked. "Almost immediately." Oddly enough, he chuckled. "It took a scenic route. Found myself near Linux dump site. There's a lot of shit going on there, I tell you. Curiosity got the better of me, and, well, I got too close. These 3 men saw me and gave chase." Maren's breath caught in her throat. "We're within a sprint's distance from Linux dump site?" The man gave a nervous chuckle. "I'd forgotten it was north of the city. Was wondering why the land was so flat for so long. Got away from Linux quickly, I guess. So I got that thing going for me." Maren wiped her hands after tossing the last blob into the fire. No goop stained them, but she needed to move her hands or else the stranger would see them shaking. The city's dump site held more than the most disgusting materials and hazardous waste created within the city, usually by business or governmental research and development departments. The fact that she was so close to Linux dump site meant she could actually take the same route this traveler had to reach the city quicker than she'd feared, which by itself was good news. The fact of the matter was, however, she was close to one of the most dangerous places in Neria, possibly even Talum, and these monstrosities had broken out of it. So I'm very happy to run into you, almost literally, the man continued. Who'd have thought, meeting a wielder out here, of all places. What are you doing out here anyway? Right. She'd been about to tell this guy right before she realized where she'd left her bag. Maren drowned her fear and beamed. She was a wielder, one who had just saved his life. She couldn't let him see her anxieties. She found the nearest large rock and planted one foot on it, thrusting her chest out and fixing her hands onto her hips. I am. She swished her head aside, her tailed hair flopping against her back, and stared at the eastern horizon. The leader of Talum's first traveling guild. With the look he gave her, he might as well found a new titan to worship. Thankfully, he was so amazed that it looked like he simply accepted that what she said was awesome and deserving of respect. Which, of course it was. Other people she'd met on the road, however, had often raised annoying questions when she'd made that declaration. I'm going to Linux to recruit members and solve any problems I can. Well, the man said, glancing at the fire, there is one you can look into. Maren cut her theatrics. A job. One of the things she'd been searching for had basically run into her. Could you look into it? The man asked, presenting his left arm. A band with a small screen decorated his wrist. I can pay you, half now, half later when the job's done. Maren bit her lip. She should have jumped at the chance, given what she'd just been complaining about before seeing the man. If the abominations had come from Linux dump site, that meant something disturbing was happening in the city. It was entirely possible that Maren and this man were the only parties not involved with the monstrosity's creation who knew about it. This needed investigating. However, this might be a big job, Maren said. Bigger than me. Then the half I pay now can be thanks for saving my life. Just, please. I left the city, but I have loved ones there. It was like an icicle to her heart. No matter how many reasons one might have, leaving loved ones behind was never easy, even if the absence of one of them was a reason for the departure. She smiled, hoping to hide her melancholy. You got it. The man tapped his wrist to her raised tablet, transferring 200 credits. He blushed, turning away. It's not much, but it's enough, Maren said. It would get her through the week, maybe more if she budgeted well. Stay safe, and don't get lost again. I'll try. She charged up the hill, ready for her first real adventure since leaving her previous guild. In the excitement, she realized she'd never gotten the man's name, but when she turned around, he was already gone. He had been quick on his feet. Turning from the spot, she faced her destination. Linux. Think about that later, Maren. Right now, you've finally got a job to do. Coda took a deep breath, eyes closed, losing himself in his meditation. The train was a great place for it. The soft seats, the still air, the pleasant hum of the vehicle as it glided over the monorail. One might forget they were entering one of the nation's busiest and most bustling cities. Whoa, cool! Mav shouted from across the car. I can see everyone gathering in Glen Park. Must be for the festival. That's a lot of people. Footsteps thundered until a body rushed to the window nearest Coda. And that's the central arena. Think there's gonna be a challenger today? Will we have time to watch a match? Coda had lied. He could never lose himself to meditation whenever Mav was around. And Mav was always around. Our train home doesn't leave until tomorrow morning, Coda said, abandoning the meditation. If there is a match, we should have time to see it. Mav beamed, the childlike expression clashing with his otherwise professional physique. Sleek black hair tied into a tight bun, spotless peacekeeper uniform of black and white worn tidily, and dark eyes folded in at the corner, which could have been imposing had they not twinkled like a puppy eager for a walk. Most citizens would probably feel more at ease if their peacekeepers didn't act in such a manic manner. Mav, however, was brilliant at many things. Reining himself in was not among them. Not like it mattered. There were only 2 in the car. "There is something I'd like to check into first," Coda said. "This again?" Mav said. "Why does it matter if the train's empty? People probably commuted to Linux already for the festival. Just gives us more room to stretch." Which was exactly what Mav had said 2 hours ago when they'd boarded the train. But humanity was hardly known to plan ahead. Regardless of how many early comers there were to the festival, plenty of civilians would commute into the city the day of the celebration. So why were they alone? The city skyline gave way to a darkened tunnel, which itself gave way to their terminal. Coda's suspicions expanded as the doors opened. Stepping onto the platform, the terminal was practically barren. Only a few commuters were about, and even they made a headlong stride towards their destination. Mav, however, found something more pressing to concern himself with. "Flames above!" Mav said, grabbing Coda's shoulder and pulling him in. "That woman's walking her cat!" Indeed, a young woman sped down the terminal, leash in hand. On the opposing end was a small tabby. Before Coda could hold him back, Mav rushed toward the woman, pleading to pet the cat. The woman allowed him, glancing about as the cat rubbed against Mav's shins. She looked distraught, but didn't want to refuse a peacekeeper. "You know, Sergeant Allen told us not to abuse our power," Coda said as he reached Mav. "How is petting a cat an abuse of power?" Mav said. "What is going on, ma'am?" Coda asked the woman. "Where is everyone?" She had an incredulous look, then glanced down at Coda's uniform, identical to Mav's, only made from thinner material, which seemed to remind her of his status. "Have you not seen the news?" she asked. "Just got debriefed from training," Coda said. "We were forbidden all access to the outside world until about 2 o'clock this morning. If we weren't rushing to a train, we were sleeping." "Sorry, Wondrous Keeper," she said. "I shouldn't have questioned." Mav, picking up on her troubled tone, ceased petting the cat and stood tall. "Is there something wrong?" The woman gave a hurried nod. "Kidnappings. Over 20 of them in the last week alone. All of them close to the station." "That is a lot in such a short time," Coda said. "More go missing every day," she said. "If it weren't absolutely necessary, I'd be at home right now." "And the cat?" The woman looked offended. "For emotional support." Oh, the illogic of humanity. Massive kidnappings occur, so bring a cat to work. And these were the kinds of people Mav was so eager to protect. "What are the police doing?" Mav asked. "How about Linux Guild?" "Police are too busy with the Thanksgiving to the Flame Bearers Festival," the woman said. "And Sacred Skies has taken out some contracts, but they haven't been any help." Mav gave Coda a look, one he was all too familiar with. "You know, it is not really our business," Coda said. "Of course it is," Mav said. "We're peacekeepers." "Not officially. Not yet." "Then enjoy the sights. I'm gonna look into it myself." Coda made a long blink. "I'll make some calls." Mav grinned, then turned to the woman. "We'll escort you to a safe place, ma'am. Don't worry. We'll deal with this in no time." Maren took a deep breath, but the anxiety rioting through her guts never settled. She clenched her hands tighter. The thinning bark from the top branches of the elder tree, which she'd climbed rough in her grip. The ground seemed so far away from this vantage. The distance seemed to grow every moment she looked down, her stomach tightening. Maren looked up, clenched her eyes tight, and took another breath. She'd have preferred to do her job with her feet planted firmly on the ground. However, even the peak of this hill didn't give her a good enough vantage point of the region she needed to spy upon. Linux dump site. It was no place for the city's normal trash, which would either be recycled or placed in size-changing dumpsters and hauled away. This was a place for the worst material created in the city, but material that was too valuable to simply be placed far away without a watchful eye. The site was entirely within a large hollowed hill. From what Maren knew of dump sites, the hill's exterior was meant to be solid. This one, however, had several gaping maws along the hillside, from which odd red and purple lights glowed. That didn't bode well. Even with the dump site's normal protections, like the tall, thin tower standing at regular intervals along the hill's base, which formed a barrier to prevent entry or exit, it was known that a venom seeped into the land from the dump site. The effects were evident. For more than 100 yards around the dump site, no grass grew, and the soil was a pale brown, displaying several cracks along the surface. Horror stories came to mind of employees whose hazmat suits had a small breach. Said people were known to have all the life drained from them. The lucky ones to survive spent the rest of their days in a hospital bed, hooked up to God knew what to keep them alive. Most damning of all, according to most people, is how not even the Titans would near the region of the dump site. It was truly a despicable place. So how much worse would it get with the hull of the hill breached? At a farther tower drew Maren's attention, but she couldn't make out details from this distance. She wrapped her legs around the thin upper bark and squeezed herself close, heart hammering as she removed her tablet from her nylon bag. It was the size of her knuckle, but she pressed two of the opposing edges for a second and then expanded it until the screen was larger than her face. She entered her camera application, then zoomed in on the movement. Technicians surrounded two of the nearest towers, while 5 workers bearing large firearms filled the space between, approximately 100 yards. All were wearing hazmat suits to keep themselves as safe as possible. Maren steadied her hand, then took a picture of the workers. It was too blurry to make out many details, so she ran her photo through a different app that would help her clear up the picture. In the meantime, Maren made a quick search for which companies had branches in Linux, which were given access to the dump site. Maren sighed at all the names. There were too many for her to memorize, so she documented them to keep in her records. Obviously, Talem's largest companies used the dump site, like Trollson Tech Incorporated, Nadar, Star Weapons, and H&A Weapons Company. Plenty of smaller companies had access to Grant Incorporated, Rawson Power, Seco Research, Laser Corps, CFE, and Diverse Electric. Not to mention the government's own specific branch for research and development. No, this issue didn't come from the government. Their division wouldn't have blundered so badly as to lose monsters in the countryside. And if they had, no one would have survived to report it. A red light blinked in the corner of her tablet. The scanning app had finished improving the photo's quality. In the small corner of the hazmat suit's back, a swooping logo was barely visible. She ran the image through her secure database and found that the swooping design belonged to Trollson Tech. Doesn't mean much, really, Maren thought. Trollson could be here fixing the breach, but they could be trying to fix their own mistake. A flash of orange drew Maren's attention. One of the men standing against the dump site's entrance was bracing himself. Bright fire engulfing something out of sight. Looked like there were more horrid beasts in there, wanting to get out. So, what were her options? She could take a suit, explore the dump site, find the inevitable tunnel that led to the city's interior, and find out exactly where these abominations came from. How would she even get a suit? If she took one for the men protecting the breach or the technicians trying to fix it, there were several problems already. One, she'd have to cross more than 100 yards of barren, poisoned land. 2, she'd likely have to fight the workers for a suit, which would be easy given that she was a wielder. 3, however, they were only doing their jobs, and likely didn't deserve to lie suitless in such a toxic place. Maren would do this the long way. She searched the locations of the previous companies within the city, and created a map with their buildings highlighted. If she used the flat land between the dump site and Linux, she should find herself in the city in a few short hours. Time for some investigative work. "Do we have clearance yet?" Coda asked.
"Hard to get a hold of someone up the chain of command today,"
Sergeant Allen said, his deep voice rumbling in Coda's earpiece.
"Did you have to find trouble on a holiday?"
Mab was talking to the woman with the cat outside her office building, probably assuring her that they would get this solved by the end of the day or making other ludicrous claims. The woman looked relieved, smiling for the first time they'd seen her, and then she entered the building. It held various businesses, including physician offices and law firms. Alone, the building might have looked impressive, but not even half a block down the road toward the city's center, the edifices grew in size and grandeur. Skyscrapers growing taller the closer they were to the center dominated this region. Talem's largest companies had branches here, those with lucrative government contracts located in the most sought places. It made sense, as the spire, Neria and therefore Talem's main government building, stood proudly apart from the rest in Linux Center. It easily was twice the size of the next tallest skyscraper, its top sloping up to a point. 12 gargantuan rings, which held everything from offices to expensive restaurants, surrounded the spire at varying levels. Long, sturdy platforms connected the rings to the main building, all within a 5-minute trot of the main train station. I wouldn't care so much if the kidnappings weren't so sudden and extreme, Coda said. Truthfully, he didn't care. It was Mav who was dragging him into this. So, you couldn't reach anyone?
I didn't say that.
Sergeant Allen sighed. Coda could imagine the man pinching the bridge of his nose.
I got the same replies from Linux Police, the Spire's Peacekeepers, and the President's personal unit. They're overseeing the festival, guarding the VIPs who are attending.
There will be thousands of people at the festival, and they're only going to defend 6?
Need I remind you, those 6 are 3 Ardent Bishops and the Ardent Cardinal, Governor McNeely, and President Weaver herself. If anything happened to them, if these kidnappers were to do something to them, it could throw all of Talem into chaos.
Sounds more like they're going to relax and enjoy the feast.
Watch the tone,
Sergeant Allen said.
These are your superiors, and this festival is sacred.
Like the other 26 holidays, doesn't mean we should stop doing our jobs and leave the people defenseless. Like Mav, Sergeant Allen had a strong moral compass. Whenever Coda's apathy made his language a little too curt, thus making it all the more difficult to nudge the argument in the direction he wanted, all he had to do was bring the conversation back to defending the innocent to get either Mav or Coda's CO back on his side. Things usually flowed smoothly from there.
You're right,
Sergeant Allen said.
Do what you need to do. I informed 2nd Lieutenant Franklin of the situation. He said if you find solid proof of who's taken those people, you can act. Have anyone who troubles you contact him. Also, you've been granted clearance to view the security footage from any camera in a mile radius from the station. That should at least start you in the right direction.
Coda inhaled, held, exhaled. Respectfully, sir, why did you not lead with this?
So you can know how much effort I put in for your sorry asses.
Now Coda could imagine Sergeant Allen smiling, his gleaming white teeth contrasting with his deeply dark skin.
So get to work and keep your comms at the ready. Never know when new info comes in.
Yes, sir.
Finally, how's the goof doing?
Mav was currently examining the main street, inspecting a stray car that drove by. He glanced at Coda, but quickly looked away when they made eye contact. He was clearly trying to be polite and wait for Coda's conversation to end, but really wanted to know what Sergeant Allen was saying. Had he heard those last words? Mav would have put on a fake smile and adopted the excessively bombastic attitude he'd been performing for the past 3 weeks. Coda never bothered with smiles, whether real or fake. Made things easier for him, especially after what had happened in that cave. Keeping himself busy, Coda said, but...
Understandable,
Sergeant Allen said.
The whole cohort lost something special with Thomas. Just make sure Maverick processes everything well, all right?
Yes, sir.
Don't suppose I need to ask about you?
No, sir. Something twisted inside Coda's chest. He'd like to get off this subject.
Good luck out there, Dakota. And be careful. Don't let grief make y'all do something foolish.
Understood, sir. The comm cut, leaving Coda enough time to unbend the coils wrapping around his heart before he approached Mav. Let's go somewhere private, Coda said. The only backup we're getting is a week's worth of video feed from a small area. So, no one's asked to kick yet? Mav asked. It's barely 8 in the morning. Help with this, and we'll find you someone by lunchtime.
Here you go,
the friendly, heavy-set food truck worker said, handing Maren her lunch.
Hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Maren said, taking the stew. Will do. Nerian stew, an easy but delicious favorite of hers, packed with meat, potatoes, onions, and carrots. This hearty stew had always supplied her with a warm heart and a full belly. Her stomach howled, voicing its vexation. Maren delighted in calming the irate organ, her mouth cheering as the savory stew began to ease her hunger.
Must have had one hell of a run,
the food truck proprietor said. You don't know the half of it, Maren said. Linux northern skyline came into view, not long after she'd left the dump site zone. Maren had wanted to get into the city as quickly as possible, but she'd known she would need to conserve her energy as much as possible for whenever she would inevitably run into more abominations. So she compromised, sometimes jogging, sometimes walking. Regardless, it had taken her over 4 hours to reach the city, and she was exhausted. She couldn't remember the last time she worked her legs and lungs so hard. She'd even used up all of her... I'm sorry, Maren said, but my water?
Oh, right. Sorry,
the man said, ducking behind the counter, then giving her 4 full large bottles of water.
My apologies.
Maren had placed the stew down, then filled her enlarged canteen. There was a little left over, from which she took slow, even sips to finish off. She took her stew, then leaned back and looked out at the small city park. Can I ask you a couple of things? Maren asked.
Go ahead,
the friendly man said. Where is everyone? On any other day, Maren would have taken her lunch, then sat down at a nearby bench or open spot in the grass to enjoy it. She surely would not have stood in front of the line, chatting with the food truck worker and holding up the queue. There was, however, no one else in line at the moment. It was like this in every other part of the city she'd seen. Much of the city had been what she'd expected once she left the initial residential sector she'd entered. Linux streets were full of various shops and restaurants. The green spaces had been spectacular too, even in a place like this, so far from Linux' famous Glen Park. There were plenty of trees where families could sit under to enjoy the shade, as well as ponds and picturesque bridges which led from one knoll to another. On a neighboring street corner, a mall advertised items like clothing, jewelry, electronics, art, and various sorts of knickknacks. Not to mention the bars. Dozens upon dozens lined the streets, built with colorful reds and yellows to invite someone in for a good time. Still, Maren could count on 2 hands the number of people she'd seen about. 3 of them were in the park, 2 parents and a teenage boy. One of them was the food truck proprietor, who had the only truck open in this park.
You don't know what's going on?
The man said. I know about the festival, Maren said. I'm sure a lot of people are in Glen Park right now for the feast, but not everyone celebrates the same way. Only the ardent should have the day off, and I always thought Linux was split pretty evenly between the 5 sects.
That tracks from the people I know at least.
So, where are the quenchers, the autonomous, the listeners? No one else is around and very few shops are open. What's going on here?
I take it you're not from around here.
Maren shook her head. I'm from Westock, but I'm on a long trip. I've been staying away from the internet, mostly, unless a job requires that I get on it. The man sighed, his beady eyes drooping.
Well, it appears you came in at a poor time, tourist.
The man explained to her about the kidnappings. Maren's mouth almost dropped. Over 20 kidnappings in a week? Why hadn't that blonde man told her about that? Maren finally checked the news. Sure enough, article after article detailing the number of missing persons in the general region they'd all taken place in. Most of them happened near the city center, Maren said. A couple of miles from here.
Yeah, but you never know when the trend'll break,
the man said. Maren's mouth firmed. She downed the rest of her stew, took a swig of water, then readjusted her blanket to keep her warm from the winter wind drifting through the lonely streets. Thank you for the meal, Maren said.
You're welcome, lass,
the man said.
You be careful out there.
Like that would happen. More than 20 people missing, and now strange abominations were terrorizing Linux dump site? If those two didn't correlate, Maren would spend the rest of winter without her blanket over her. I'll do my best, Maren called, then ran down the street towards the spire. Are we done yet? Mav groaned. A moment, Coda said, typing on the screen in his uniform's left arm. It was already filled with a mass of tiny text. Anyone who might want to look over his shoulder to see what he'd written would immediately be forced to give up due to the block of information. For Coda, however, it was perfectly legible. He put in the last bits of data he'd found.
Finally!
Mav said, pushing off from the desk and standing up, his chair clattering to the floor. They were sitting in an office with an ovular table and a dozen chairs. No windows to look outside, no large screen on the wall for presentations, which likely happened in the room. The place was lit by only one working light on the ceiling. A perfect environment for Coda to work. So he hadn't asked for a different room from the receptionist in the front hall. Mav would have preferred a brighter place, likely with a view outside, but would have felt it rude to ask for one, especially since the receptionist had already looked nervous enough giving them this space.
Hold it, Coda said.
What now? Mav said. We have our info. Let's go find these bastards and take them down. Rushing in will help no one, Mav. And waiting for someone else to get kidnapped definitely won't. Look, we have a good start. We wander the streets and inspect any service vehicles we see. In the 4 hours they'd spent scanning through last week's video feed from various government and local business cameras, they'd found one common denominator between most of the 23 missing persons. Service vehicles. Of the 16 victims the cameras had picked up minutes before their capture, 13 were seen with unmarked service vans nearby. It could have been a coincidence, as city maintenance happened daily, but it could also have been a clever front, taking people under the guise of repairing the city. It was also their only lead. And how are we going to inspect these vehicles? Coda said. Remember, we were only told to act when we have absolute proof of wrongdoing. Easy, Mav said. I'll ask them politely to open their trunks. They won't deny a peacekeeper. Unless they actually have bodies in the back. Then I'll know they're bad, and I'll act. Boom! Absolute proof. Coda closed his eyes, held them, then opened. That's not how that works. Then view from around here and find a service vehicle. If there are people tied in bags or strung up on the wall, then we have our proof, and we can get them. So determined, so good-natured, yet so naive. With Coda's gift, he could view the surrounding space within reason and possibly find people in the process of being kidnapped. If they acted immediately, however, then they saved one person. But if Coda was able to follow that van back to their hideout, then they could rescue them all. And that was if service vehicles were used as a front. Regardless, Coda couldn't explain that to Mav. He'd never let a defenseless civilian be used as bait, even if that meant they could hook a behemoth. Here's what we should do, Coda said, pulling up a map of the area. All 23 victims were taken within a half-mile radius of Lennox's largest administration district, which held both the terminal and the spire. I can cover a lot more ground, so you check this block while I view the rest. A grin broke over Mav's face as he punched his palm. Perfect! Now let's go get these assholes. And Titan's willing I get them first, so we can be done with this much faster. Mav had to punch something, so it was a good thing the Titans blessed him with 3 evildoers just 2 minutes after entering the block Coda had told him to investigate. Mav called Coda over his comms. Found a car. Gonna go have a chat. Coda would come by to back him up in a few minutes, but Mav could handle himself before then. The service vehicle he found was driving down an alley off the main street right toward him. He hopped into the middle of the path and the car stopped. Easy. Excuse me, gentlemen, Mav said. Please leave the vehicle and open your trunk for me. The driver, a squat, wide man, looked at the man in the nearest passenger seat, who was much taller and had a gaunt face, and the other one in the farther seat, who seemed both short like the driver, but skinny like the middle passenger, then back to Mav. In a gruff voice, he asked,
What seems to be the problem, Peacekeeper?
Got a lead about those kidnapped people, Mav said. I'll open the trunk, so I can prove your innocence. The skinny man inhaled, but the squat driver scowled.
Unless you got a warrant, I ain't doing shit.
Mav grinned. Absolute proof. Mav rushed to the trunk, but it was locked. Instead of driving away, which Mav feared they would try, 2 doors from the van side opened and feet hit the ground. A slight chill settled over Mav as he melted the lock, then flung the trunk open. A man and a woman, both probably in their 30s, were gagged and bound to the walls. It was a deep trunk, which could allow these evil men to stuff several more people inside.
Shouldn't have done that,
The squat driver said, coming from the left. He raised his leg, preparing to stomp the ground. Inside the van, the man was unconscious, but the woman's drooping eyes met Mav's pleading.
Flash fire,
Mav growled, his left arm whipping to the side. The chill intensified, and a small, controlled blast escaped his palm, blowing the squat driver backwards.
burst.
The man in the passenger seat came from Mav's right. The short guy leaped back, pulling bottles off his uniform belt, and then threw them on the ground. A wave of water, larger than should have fit in those containers, burst forth, reaching to Mav.
Fire shield.
Mav slammed his hands on the ground before him. A pillar of flame erupted before the wave, blasting the central portion into steam while the rest harmlessly passed by him. Before he could engage the skinny worker, the ground shook. The squat driver was on his feet, glaring at Mav as he quickly patted his smoldering uniform to put out the small flame that remained. Mav regained his balance, but the skinny worker was waving his arms in a circle, forcing the water to arch in the air. Mav took a quick breath, unclenching his left fist. The chill in his core worsened as a dozen points of concentrated fire dotted his palm.
Flaming scattershot.
Mav thrust his arm skyward, sending tiny fireballs at the gathering water. Large wafts of steam exploded outward, the rest of the liquid water raining harmlessly onto the ground. Then a fireball the size of a fist pummeled Mav in the chest, forcing him several feet back. Mav smirked.
Thanks for warming me up.
The new assailant was the tall and gaunt middle passenger, standing atop the van, already holding another fireball. On the left, the squat man was lowering his foot to the ground to make it rumble again. On the right, the skinny man reached for 2 more containers from his belt. Looked like he had 4 more after this. With renewed warmth, Mav brought his hands behind him, facing the road diagonally.
Short burst rocket.
His gathered energy exploded at his palms, propelling him toward the gaunt man as the muscular one stomped on the street. The alley blurred as Mav flew. He then placed a well-timed kick on the gaunt man that sent him onto the main street. Mav's momentum practically stopped, so he twisted in midair, body chilling as flames erupted over his arms. He landed on the van and extended his fiery palm at the other 2.
Flamethrower.
A stream of orange fire engulfed the fake service workers. They screamed, backing and flailing away as their clothes caught fire. Mav descended as the men burned, removed the victims from the van, and placed them against a nearby building. Water spouted from beneath the burning men, dousing the flames that enveloped them. Mav gathered heat into his palm, forming a sphere of fire the size of his head.
Fire blast.
The eruption of steam that followed whipped a hot wind down the alley. Caught in the middle of it, the kidnappers' howls of pain were cut short as the explosive pressure blasted them into the alley's walls. 2 thumps sounded as they hit the ground motionless. Mav placed his fingers on their necks, in turn finding a pulse on both of them. Alive, but unconscious. Now they could spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes. But first, Mav rose and faced the main street. It was time to deal with that gaunt flame dancer. The distant booms and crackles of fireworks barely reached Maren's ear. From the map she'd looked at, Glen Park didn't appear too far from this district. It made sense she could hear at least a small bit of the festivities taking place for the festival from the city center. A center which was quite different from the fringes that surrounded it. Instead of multiple colors of bars and restaurants, everything here seemed so uniform and utilitarian. Gray buildings hosted offices, lavish restaurants way out of Maren's price range, fancy clothing stores, and of course, bars. Not the friendly, warm, and welcoming kind she'd seen just 30 minutes ago. These were boring, bland, and corporate. The greatest variety in color came from the massive electronic billboards which displayed an enticing product, which one could buy at the local megamarket stores before it was replaced with another one. At least Maren finally saw people. Sure, many of them were rushing to their destination, faces shifting from side to side in an almost paranoid manner. The only person who wasn't in a rush was a blonde woman in a business suit and heels, flanked by 2 massive men on either side. Maren watched as they leisurely walked up the steps of a plaza which led...
Boom!
From an alley several streets down, a man soared backward into the main street. Maren's heart pounded. Then she rushed forward and peered into the alley. A peacekeeper stood atop a service vehicle, gathering flames along his arms, opposing two men on the ground wearing matching uniforms. Not exactly a difficult choice of whom to help. If a peacekeeper was fighting someone, there was a good chance that the someone was on the wrong side of the law. If said fight took place in the heart of wherever 23 people had been kidnapped in the last week, that made Maren's decision even easier. The flung man had rolled to the other sidewalk. Despite how painful that must have been, the man got to his feet. Granted, he was fumbling and groaning, but small spheres of flames ignited in his palms a moment later. Criminal or not, Maren had to respect that determination. The flame dancer didn't so much as glance at Maren as he charged to the alley. Looked like his tunnel vision would give her an easy victory. She removed her warm blanket and took a wide stance, bracing herself. Water formed on both shoulders, which she channeled down to her chest. She held her hands before her, connecting the tips of each hand's fingers to form an opening, where she would create a pressurized funnel. As the flame dancer attempted to enter the alley, Maren blasted him with a stream stronger than the one from a firefighter's hose. He flew to the side, his fire extinguishing like a candle's. The force pushed her back, but her braced position kept her standing. The man hit the ground and Maren ceased her stream, keeping the rest of her water along her upper torso. The man held another fireball before he was back on his feet, flinging it at her as she rose. It was too fast for her to dodge, so she coated her arms in water and held them before her face. Tss! The flame hit her shield, evaporating most of the water. A second volley slammed into what remained of her shield. She exclaimed, bringing her arms back as an intense heat scalded her forearms. The man took a labored breath. Looked like he could land on his back only so many times before his lungs lost air. Maren, shaking her arms to help cool them down, returned his glare with a smile. He brought both hands to his side, forming two more flaming spheres. "You're very creative, aren't you?" Maren said, mouth drying. Tendrils of water sprouted from her skin, arcing back then whipping forward as the fireballs grew in size. Maren's water lashed the man on his upper arms, abdomens, lower legs, and face. His skin reddened with each strike and his face winced with pain. He flailed about as if to slap the water tendrils away. In his frenzy, the two spheres expelled from his palms. One hitting the street, the other a sign hanging from a building. Both left scorch marks. "Now what did public property ever do to you?" Maren asked. He was already creating more fire. Might as well end it before he damaged the city any further. She focused water into her palm, ready to shoot a powerful yet controlled blast to knock him out. But as she did, an explosion sounded from down the alley, and steam slammed her in the side. The sudden force put her off balance, and her gift squeezed the water point she'd been holding. Her stream was thinner and more forceful than she'd intended. It hadn't simply hit the man's gut. It slid straight through it. So much for following a van back to the hideout. Of course the Titans decided to present Mav with some actual kidnappers the moment he went out on the street. Coda had stood in a stunned silence after Mav had hung up, questioning the cosmic joke at play which ruined his plan. This could have been done in a half hour, an hour at max. But no. They would likely spend the rest of their day on this investigation, all because Mav had found that damned car. The fight itself had gone smoothly. By the time Coda arrived, he hadn't been tempted to join, letting Mav have his fun, until the civilian appeared. Then that civilian turned out to be a wave leaper who assisted Mav without the righteous guy knowing she was even there. So long as one was left conscious, Coda's new plan could run smoothly. Then the wave leaper shot a hole through the errant flame dancer's gut. Coda groaned, hiding his eyes in his hand. He'd used his gift to hover about 30 feet in the air, his vantage giving him sight of both brawls. Mav, after knocking out the two wielders, entered the main street. There, the third fake worker stood, hand clenched over a wound in his gut. The yellow uniform became stained in scarlet. The man fell, blood pooling along the street. The wave leaper stood, trembling slightly, her upper body surrounded by water. Mav had spotted the two. His charge never faltered, heading straight for the wave leaper now. Oh, great. Coda tried to reach out with his gift, but Mav was too close. Mav wrapped the shocked wave leaper in a strong embrace. Yelling a move's name, then the water turned to steam. Coda flew down to them, landing by the injured man who grasped the wound in his belly. "Let me go!" the civilian shrieked. She was squirming in Mav's grasp. Coda almost smirked at Mav, who was trying to comprehend the situation. Mav had done this move many times in practice. Grapple a wave leaper who guarded themselves in water, then release a controlled dose of fire outward to remove the shield while leaving the leaper relatively unharmed. He needn't have done that to an ally, however. Brain working as quickly as a tortoise trudging through tar, Mav's eyes widened. He released the civilian, blushing. "Sorry," Mav mumbled. "Didn't know."
"That I helped?"
the wave leaper said, affronted. She didn't appear to be one strong enough to punch a hole, even a tiny one, through a person. She was a little shorter than Coda, which meant she was a good half-foot shorter than Mav, and had a glare hotter than a frizzy orange hair, which was pulled back into two uneven tails. Her attire was bizarre given the winter season. High-waisted short shorts and a blue sports bra. Coda spotted a small red nylon bag atop a red blanket, likely how she kept warm. Another quick scan revealed the location of her mark. The tattoo all wielders were required to have visible on their skin. Her wave leaper's mark, however, was beneath her left clavicle, partially obscured by her sports bra. 2 rows of 3 bumps which overlapped each other, representing waves. "I was moving fast and," Mav said.
"Aren't peacekeepers supposed to be aware of their surroundings?"
the wave leaper interrupted.
"Can't you tell?"
The fake worker groaned, huddling into himself. They ceased bickering, the wave leaper biting her lip while Mav's eyes widened. "Coda," Mav said, "I'm holding in the blood as best I can," Coda said, the little black dots only Coda could see shoving against his wound. "But he's lost a lot already, and will lose more. He needs help." "Where's the nearest hospital?" Mav asked the wave leaper, who was already running to her bag.
"Not far,"
she said after pulling out a tablet.
"I can give you the directions."
"The van?" Mav asked. "I can't carry them all and be fast at the same time," Coda said. "Return the kidnapped people to the van. We'll take them to the hospital in a single trip."
"You want the kidnappers and the people they took next to each other?"
"Their abductors are either out cold or dying, and I'll be back there with them. They will not be in danger," he said to the wave leaper.
"Name's Maren,"
she said. "Mav will drive. You lead him to the hospital." Coda lifted the injured flame dancer with his gift, the little black specks holding the man afloat. To the others, it would look like the man was levitating. The civilian stared in disbelief.
"I think I should go to the police station,"
the civilian said.
Report it, and..."
"You're the reason we're losing our lead. If this man dies, there goes our quickest route to saving the other victims. You are coming with us. Now, hurry." The hospital had been calm. Doctors and nurses checked on their patients lying in cots inside large plain rooms. Others wandered the sterile hallways, reading through files on tablets, discussing patient needs or normal gossip, or forging ahead to their respective destinations. Some patients had a modicum of freedom, meandering the halls looking for food, the chapel, or simply something to do, until the peacekeepers brought the dying man in. Maren had followed them, slightly queasy. The tall peacekeeper, Mav, had driven quite recklessly, flooring and braking suddenly, taking excessively sharp and fast turns, and even running red lights. The peacekeepers had succinctly explained the situation. The nurses distributed each injured person to a proper room. The kidnapped victims went to a recovery room. The unconscious fake service workers to a separate one where they were handcuffed to their beds, and the dying flame dancer to the emergency room. Now, 20 minutes later, a tense silence settled over Maren. Mav had left to check on the kidnapped victims, abandoning her outside the operating room with the shorter peacekeeper, Coda. The young man couldn't have been more different from his friend. His dark brown hair was close cropped, almost to the point where he was bald, and he sported a neat, trimmed goatee the same color as his hair. His light brown skin displayed no evidence of smile lines along his cheeks or eyes, which were dark and narrowed, intensely calculating and cold. He stood at attention, except for his arms, which were folded, making Maren feel like he was judging not only her, but everything else around him. This was someone Maren did not want to cross. The door to the ER opened, and several nurses exited. The doctor, a very tall man, finally left and approached Coda. "He's stable," the doctor said. but he won't be up for several hours. Coda didn't raise his head to meet the doctor's eyes. His eyes flitted upwards, then he nodded. The doctor departed, his shoulders shivering. Coda pressed 2 fingers at his left wrist where his protective forearm gear connected to his glove. A small hiss sounded, then a panel on his forearm opened. He pulled it back to display his screen, which he tapped several times. "Mav," Coda said. "How are they?" "Good. Get back ASAP. He's alive, but out. We need to interrogate the civilian." Now Coda turned his gaze on Maren. She held her blanket tighter around her, but that didn't stop the shudder. A minute later, Mav sped-walked down the hallway, nearly bowling over a patient flirting with a nurse at the nursing station and apologizing profusely from over his shoulder, never missing a step. "They're sleeping," Mav said, eyes manic and nostrils flared. "But the doctors are detoxing them. They were drugged, injection point at the neck. I forget the name, but it's basically a strong sedative. Too much of it, though, and you don't wake up." "Easy, Mav," Coda said, as if he were trying to calm a frenzied animal. "Rushing ahead won't help the victims. If their kidnappers misdosed them, then they're already dead." Mav's fists trembled. "It's likely worse than that," Maren breathed. They fixed their sights on her. Now Mav looked more like an actual peacekeeper. "Then let's do this officially and quickly." Coda tapped the screen on his arm a few more times. "Full name?"
Maren Daly,
Date of birth?
21st Daber, 1216.
"Happy belated birthday," Mav said. "Says you left your old guild, Radiant Dawn, the day after your 18th birthday," Coda said, reading the screen. "Why?"
"I wanted something new,"
Maren said, her answers already prepared.
"I wanted to do something that no one in Talum has ever done."
"Which is?" Mav asked. Maren beamed, planting her foot on the nearest bench, fixed her hands to her hips, making the blanket fall to the floor, and stuck out her chest.
"I am,"
she swished her head aside, staring dramatically down the hallway,
"the leader of Talum's first traveling guild."
Mav, his professional peacekeeper demeanor already dropped, mouthed the word cool. Coda, however, looked at her with glazed eyes. "What's the name of this guild?" Coda asked.
"I don't know yet,"
Maren declared. "How many members?"
"Just me."
Coda actually sighed. Having trouble recruiting for a pointless endeavor?
"It's not pointless."
Maren removed her foot from the bench and threw her arms to the side. "Talum already has dozens of guilds."
"But they're located in the largest cities. What about the villages and hamlets, not to mention the counties that don't have a guild?"
"You are a member of Talum's oldest and largest guild. You know how guild work operates better than me." Maren bit her tongue. Of course Coda wasn't like that blonde man from before, or like Mav, and simply admired her adventurous spirit. Not that he didn't make sense, nor had he been the first to point it out. If a smaller rural settlement needed aid from a guild, they would simply make the contract online. If accepted by a guild member, said person would travel to their client and then do the job.
"But there are so many people the guilds don't help," Maren said. "Hundreds of requests go unanswered because a village is too far away, or the reward isn't worth the time and cost of getting there. As a traveling guild, we're already on the move. If one of those places has problems, we can help."
"You think you can afford to continually travel to every settlement in Talum?" Coda asked.
"No, but..."
Now Maren's fists were trembling.
"I can at least help where I am, and see more of the world while doing it."
Coda tapped his screen again. "Is that how you got here? Or were you in the wrong place at the wrong time? Here we go." Maren launched into her story, detailing the attack in the valley, her discovery of the breach at the dump site, and her learning of the kidnappings.
"Here's the map that I made."
Maren presented her tablet, which Mav took, his lips thin.
"I was going to investigate the area and head to the police station to see what they know."
"The police won't be much help," Coda said. Unlike Mav, who had gone pale, his demeanor hadn't changed, even at the possibility that the kidnapped victims were being turned into monstrosities. "It's been nearly half an hour since we called them about the abductors. The police station is only a few blocks away." Coda didn't continue. He didn't have to. The hospital was devoid of any form of law enforcement except him and Mav. "Then let's go to Trollson Tech," Mav growled. Not yet, Coda said.
But they're the ones doing this. Why else would they be trying to fix the towers at the dump site?
They have full access to the site. They may just have been notified of the breach first and went to fix it. Titans know what danger could seep out if it's not fixed quickly enough.
It could also be a ruse, Maren said. One company makes their workers dress in a rival's uniform. If anyone catches them, everyone will believe it's the rivals in the wrong.
Bit conspiratorial, but not impossible, Coda said.
Then what are we going to do? Mav asked, scowling. Those victims could be getting tortured right now!
Coda placed a hand on Mav's shoulder. We'll find them. Mav took a deep breath, then gave a long exhale. I don't want to sit around and do nothing. We won't, Coda said. I'll make a few calls, get some info on these three. It'll take some digging, but if we can discover anything about them, it might lead us to their employer.
And right to the victims, Maren said, turning to Coda. But couldn't your gift do that already? I mean, you're an ethereal leader who controls space. You should be able to see the whole city from here, right? How'd you know about his gift?
Mav asked, astounded. Maren and Coda stared at Mav, then shared a glance. Forgive him, Coda said. Mav is brilliant at many things. Being intelligent is not among them.
Hey, I mean, you're not wrong, but still.
I carried 5 people in the air without the slightest gust of wind or anything suspending them. What else was she supposed to think? Mav scratched the back of his head.
I was distracted with everything.
Uh-huh.
Anyway,
Maren cut in. It seemed like they'd had this style of conversation many times before, and she didn't know for how long it could go.
Why don't you just look around the city with your gift to find everyone?
Never met an ethereal leader before, have you? Coda asked.
I've heard of them.
If there was one wielder in every million people on Talum, ethereal leaders were 1 in 10 million, supposedly. She knew of one woman in the Peacekeepers with power over space, while a man with powers over time was a professional Dominion athlete. One older man was particularly powerful, as he was gifted with both space and time, though he was a cardinal for the perpetual sect of the Titanian Church. If the 1 in 10 million odds were true, there were at least 17 more ethereal leaders in Talum, and Maren was talking to one. We're not omnipotent, Coda continued. I can see a lot of the city at once, but the information can be overwhelming.
And some spatial technology messes with his vision, Mav said.
So I can't just focus for a few minutes and solve all the problems.
As awesome as that would be.
That sucks, Maren said, her shoulders drooping.
So what's our next move?
Mav and I are going to make up a plan, Coda said. You are going to stay here away from our investigation.
Excuse me?
Maren's cheeks flushed, feeling pinpricks along her head. You're a civilian, Coda explained. As your guild doesn't have the minimum 3 members to be considered official, it is not right to get you involved in this.
And you are? I don't see anything marking your ranks. You're just out of training, aren't you? Haven't even sworn your oaths yet.
We will next week, Mav put in.
But that means we're all in interim positions. I have the rest of the month to find my 2 other members, but I can take up contracts during that time.
Not if those contracts are involved with criminal investigations, Coda stated. Not even C- rank guilds have that privilege, let alone a single member, interim E- rank 1. But we, as soon-to-be peacekeepers, are allowed to help in criminal investigations, so long as we follow the parameters allowed to us. Glad to see our peacekeepers know the law, a new voice said. All 3 looked at the newcomer. She was almost as tall as Mav, with a bun of blonde hair pulled back even tighter than his. She wore a gray pinstriped blazer and a long gray skirt. Her high heels clacked on the floor as she planted her feet down, standing a foot from them. Who are you? Mav asked. Celine Hicks, Esquire, she said, flashing her credentials. Great. Maren tried not to roll her eyes as the woman shook all their hands. A lawyer. And your purpose here? Coda asked. To keep you from instigating violence against my clients any further, Celine said. Maren's stomach churned. This woman was not about to try and let those kidnappers off, was she? But maybe Maren could derail the conversation before it left the station. Who hired you? Maren asked. I know your clients didn't call you, given their condition. My employer is none of your concern, Celine said, eyes flicking over Maren as if she was something nasty stuck to the bottom of her heel. And before you make a false accusation, no, I do not legally have to share their name. Since you came before the police did, I assume your employer contacted you, Coda said. Your point? That you should be aware of the verbal report I gave them. I, as an ethereal leader, saw those three in a van with people hung to the walls. The only violence we instigated was a legal search and rescue of abducted victims. Celine pulled a small tablet from her suit pocket and expanded it. Is that so? She pressed the screen and a voice came out. Found a car. Gonna have a little chat. It was Mav's. Both Maren and Mav stared, shocked at the tablet. How had she gotten a recording from the Peacekeeper comms? Coda, however, did not miss a beat. I had seen that same car and sent Mav to where it was going. He said he had found a car, not the car, Celine said. He's never been great in school. I doubt he knows the difference between definite and indefinite articles. I notice you're awfully silent, Celine said to Mav. Mav shrugged, trying to look unconcerned, but he scratched the back of his head again. Coda told me where to go to get the people, and I went. I saw the car and went to have a chat. It turned violent. You've changed your article, Celine said with a little smirk. Mav's brow furrowed. I'm not a journalist. Maren couldn't stop herself. Despite how tense the situation was, or maybe because of it, Mav's genuine confusion and the subsequent baffled look on Celine's face made Maren laugh. Sorry, Maren said, calming herself as the lawyer gave her a death glare. But that kind of proves Coda's point. A wry smile twisted Celine's lip. Oh, it proves nothing. Unless there's documented proof, recording or otherwise, that Dakota said to him, this appears to have been an unprovoked act by recruits looking to make a name for themselves right out of training. I've collected the evidence we acquired to narrow our search to service vehicles, Coda said, tapping the screen on his arm. And we have a witness who can corroborate our investigation. Name's Millie, a receptionist down at 2113 Chaldea Lane. If you want to ask her about us and the things we said to each other, you're more than welcome. Hearsay doesn't hold my interest. So you're not going to question a witness, which would be beneficial in upholding the law, and you're calling peacekeepers liars? That would have been enough to make any regular civilian buckle. Questioning a wielder of any kind was practically sacrilegious. But insinuating that one had lied? That was unheard of, yet Celine's gaze remained cool and collected. This was a woman who worked with dangerous people. Celine pressed her tablet to Coda's forearm. This is an official cease and desist order. You'll find it's gone through all the official channels and everything is signed accordingly. So this conversation is over. Now, get out of this hospital and don't bother my clients again.
That still doesn't tell me how she got access to our comms, Coda said. Doesn't matter how big or important, a private business's lawyer should not be able to record us.
I'm only telling you what Second Lieutenant Franklin told me,
Sergeant Allen said, his deep voice rising in exasperation.
I'm not sure what you've gotten yourself into, but the second lieutenant said this came damn well near the top.
Coda held in a sigh, glaring at the park before him. He leaned against a sturdy alder tree, one of the many that encircled the park. Workout equipment was scattered along the jogging trail, on which Mav vented his frustrations. The park was a few blocks from the hospital, letting Coda keep an eye on it even without his gift. A bench enjoyed the shade the alder provided, as did the civilian, scrolling through a tablet, sitting on it.
Need I ask the obvious question, sir? Coda said.
Need I remind you that they can get access to your personal comms,
Sergeant Allen said.
And that you've been given a cease and desist.
No, sir.
Then you know what you need to do. Try to calm the goof down. What's he doing?
Currently, pull-ups. The sergeant let out a single laugh.
Tell him squats or calf raises would do him better. Help him thicken out those scrawny little legs of his.
A faint smirk twitched Coda's lips. He'll love to hear it, sir. They said their goodbyes and hung up. The civilian was lounging on the bench, cheek resting on her fist as she continued scrolling through her tablet.
Did the obvious question have anything to do with why peacekeeper generals don't want literal abductors to face judgment?
The civilian asked, darkening her tablet screen. He was right to stop me, Coda said, pulling out the screen on his forearm again. The documents that Celine transferred to him were long and detailed, signed by at least 3 majors Coda had never considered important. Now he'd have to put them on the list. Whatever we say, we have to assume they'll know it. The civilian leaned to the other side, draping her arm over the bench's back.
And I'm guessing any code or script you know comes from the peacekeepers.
Coda shook his head. Mav and I have our own. We created it when we were young with a friend. Why had he shared that last part? She didn't need to know anything about Thomas. Was he slipping? He'd better get his act together, especially starting next week. The civilian, however, stared at Mav, who was now doing sit-ups with his legs hanging from the bar.
You guys know each other that long?
Most of our lives, Coda said.
Has he always been like this?
Coda smiled, a tingle of warmth reaching him despite being in the shade. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I could handle it. He seems so immature.
Says the one who planted herself on a bench and stared dramatically into the distance after making a declaration. The civilian flushed, her face growing red.
But that was cool.
Coda glanced at her from the side of his eye. She was pouting, looking pointedly away from Coda. Not exactly Coda's style, but Mav would have found it cute. Then something clicked. It was like the full moon had escaped the clouds on a dark night, revealing a new path. Coda formulated a plan. He'd been ready to let this kidnapping matter lie, but now... He won't admit it, but he struggled with training, Coda said.
Seems like a strong fighter to me,
the civilian said. That was not the issue. You seem aware of the world. Aware enough, at least, not to see peacekeepers as the heroes were lauded to be. She glanced around, as if making sure no cameras could catch them and somehow pick up what she said next.
And since you're talking about this to me, a civilian, you don't mind sharing some of the more unfortunate mission details you've undergone?
There are several, but the incident in Messer was the worst.
Of course you were sent there. That province has more rebellion than the other 5 combined.
Last year, we took out a whole town that we were informed was filled with insurgents. Coda watched Mav flip from the bar, then go directly into a martial arts form. Intel was wrong. We slaughtered a town full of innocents.
How horrible,
she whispered, her eyes wide and voice hollow. But Mav barely participated. He claims that he could tell something was off. That was why he hung back, basically did nothing, and who knows? Maybe he's more observant than we give him credit for. But I don't think so. I think he saw all those people, barely able to fight back and defend themselves, and knew it was wrong. Not me, though. I follow orders, and I can live with it. Mav is different. He woke up for months afterwards, screaming from his nightmares. Made it hard to get a good night's rest, honestly. The civilian took a long breath.
At least he got better, right?
From that, maybe. But he has new nightmares now. Silence followed as Mav performed a complicated maneuver. He stopped as a small child ran to him, the kid's father hurrying after the boy. He's a good guy, Coda said as Mav knelt to be face level with the boy. Too good for what peacekeepers are ordered to do.
Why's he do it then? It's not just to spend time with you, is it?
Maren said. No. He likes to hang around, and Mav's always around. But he mainly wants to help people. Coda faced the civilian, and he wants to do it while traveling the world. The civilian's eyes widened, then narrowed in thought. She said nothing, but Coda didn't care. Let her stew on it. Maybe, by the end of this ordeal, he'd be able to help both Mav and the civilian. But first, he'd have to break the law and get away with it.
This is stupid.
Mav flipped off the pull-up bar, hit the ground at a roll, then went straight into Dancer Form 3, Inferno Dance. It was a complicated, aggressive maneuver that not only required vast amounts of stamina, but also extreme precision. Mav had, to his frustration, only mastered the first aspect of the form. He kicked, spun, punched, bounded, and twisted in air, knocking imagined enemies back to the side and into the ground. To those unaware of the form's intended rigor, Mav's blows would have looked amazing. He knew, however, that his punches pushed his body an inch more forward than it should have, that his kicks were too wild, causing him to lose sight of his target. Against opponents like those kidnappers, those details didn't matter. Against a master, however, he'd lose in a minute. Wrath boiled his blood, heating his skin. His anger grew with every extreme punch and sloppy kick he performed, not to mention the unwanted thoughts crowding his head. Innocent people drugged and bound to a wall, their assailants let off from legal punishments, and a government that he would soon pledge his life to, letting it happen. Not like it was the first atrocious thing that it allowed. Mav almost roared, almost clenched his eyes tight, almost chilled his core, and released a torrent of flame, almost killed a young child running towards him. His heart in his throat, Mav only just noticed the little tyke, arms outstretched as if he would give Mav a hug. He seized his form, panting. Let the child and his approaching father think it was from the exercise and not the near manslaughter.
Thank you!
The child screamed, excitedly hopping.
Thank you, thank you, thank you!
I'm so sorry, Honored One, the father said, reaching his child and holding him back. He recognized your movements from videos and thought you were a flame dancer. The father seemed to be in his early 30s, the child barely over 7. Why couldn't they share the same expression? Why did the father have such apprehension in his gaze, while the child was filled with innocent joy? Shouldn't the sight of a peacekeeper calm citizens? Let them know that whatever evils threatened them, all would be well. It was the same with the woman in the station, and the one in the office building. Mav's and Coda's presence didn't bring peace to the troubled citizens. In this case, it instilled fear. I need to change that. Mav knelt so that he was as tall as the child. What's your name?
Dad!
The boy shouted, pulling on his father's arm.
He wants to know my name!
That's an interesting name, Mav said, looking at the father. Did you or your wife come up with it? That got a small chuckle from the man as the kid said,
No! I'm Evan!
Mav grinned. Thank you, Evan. But you don't need to thank me. The kid looked confused.
You're not a dancer?
Mav held his left palm upwards, then lit a tiny fire in it. The kid exclaimed, yanking his dad's arm again, his eyes sparkling in the tiny firelight. Then we thank you, Honored Dancer, the father said, bowing slightly and forcing Evan to do the same. No, please, Mav said. You don't need to do that.
But that's what today's about,
Evan said.
Thanks for making us warm.
There are a lot of flame dancers you can thank today, but I'm not one of them. Honorable and humble, the father said, no trace of fear in his gaze any longer. But his admiration was just as unsettling. Mav wanted him to feel peace, not reverence. However, many hundreds of years ago that this festival had been created, flame dancers had provided warmth through the winter. Now, however, Mav felt the holiday should be reversed for those flame dancers who, like their ancestors, sacrificed their own lives in the cold to keep others safe. Mav blinked. A frosted hand was all he could see, holding a determined flame. When he blinked again, the child and his father stood before him, though through blurred vision.
What's the matter?
Evan asked, confused. Mav rapidly blinked the tears away. Oh, nothing. Got some dust in there. Anyway, remember, Evan, this Thanksgiving is for all the flame dancers who lived their lives in service to others, protecting the innocent and defenseless at the cost of their safety and comfort.
Like you,
Evan said.
That's why you're a peacekeeper, right?
Right. Mav stared, then tempered his resolve. The smile he gave the boy was genuine. Maybe his first true smile before the cave. Right. Despite being more than 100 yards away, Maren could tell Mav's determination in his gait as he stalked from the father and child toward them.
He seems pretty serious now,
Maren said. Coda didn't respond. He tapped his arm screen twice, eyes never leaving Mav. Whoa, man. Where's the fire? Mav, still in the distance, halted. Maren looked between the two peacekeepers. That manner of speech seemed strange for the dour trainee. Was this their code? We have half the day to kill before we got a rest, Coda said. Don't blow it all out now. If he was speaking in code, that likely meant they were going to start moving. Maren lit up her tablet and began gathering all the data she collected into a single document. Nah, go explore, Coda said. You always wanted to see if Sacred Sky's palace was bigger than the Eternal Effigy, right? Why don't you go check it out? Eternal Effigy was the guild located in Kinslow, a smaller city farther southeast in Iria, close to the coast. Were these two from Kinslow? Or at least close enough that Eternal Effigy was their local guild? Nah, Coda continued. I feel like wandering myself. I'll mosey to the central arena. You want to see a match, right? If anyone's challenging, I'll buy the tickets. Central Arena was ironically not centered in the city. Checking the map Maren had made, updated with new information, it showed that the small park they were in was closer to the city center than the arena, which was nearer to the northeastern portion of the city. However, a route from the park to Central Arena would bring Coda directly through the administrative district where most of the kidnappings had occurred. The Sacred Skies Palace was also near the center of the city, directly west of Glen Park. Maren didn't know Coda's plan, but whatever he was concocting, it allowed for him to be in the thick of the kidnappings while Mav wasn't too far away. Regardless of his plot, Maren would make sure she was a part of it. I'll message you if there's a gauntlet, Coda continued. And you, peace. Mav turned and walked eastward, in the direction of the Sacred Skies Palace.
That's some code you got there,
Maren said. Do not expect that from me often, Coda said, lowering the protective layer back atop his arm screen. He'll get information and, possibly, help from Sacred Skies. He'll message me any updates. I will do the same.
This coming from the guy who was confused that I knew your gift?
Don't worry. Our code is something he has completely memorized.
How much info you think he'll get from Sacred Skies?
Coda's mouth twitched. Perhaps he prevented himself from grimacing. Anything will be fine. But now we are simple civilians touring a city we have never visited, taking in all the sights.
According to your message.
So, officially, we are no longer working the case. But if I were to spot a civilian doing something she should not, in a place where she should not be, then I'd have to do something to stop her, as is my duty as a peacekeeper. Maren smirked. Looked like she wouldn't need to fight her way into this plan.
So I'm assuming that means you don't want this info transferred to your device.
Officially, the less I know, the better. She showed him the document she'd created.
I've done some digging on Celine Hicks. She's a partner at the Polk and Austin firm here in Linux. She's won some high-profile cases for a few of the companies I was already looking into. Seco Research, CFE, and
Trolson Tech, Coda finished. That name comes up a lot.
Do you agree with Mav? You think it's them?
It seems so, but the evidence we have is fleeting and circumstantial.
But this is the best we can do now. Granted, 3 places to investigate is much better than the 10 I had originally. Most of the kidnappings have happened within a mile or 2 from their headquarters. Everything centered around Trolson Tech. It seems like they're the obvious choice.
Coda asked.
Trolson is huge. Much bigger than either Seco or CFE. Their tech empire spans all of Talum. So why, even if they were abducting people to conduct illegal experiments on them, would they do it in their own basement? You're telling me they don't have another facility in the city that they could run experiments in? Or that they were too lazy to look outside a 2-mile radius of their own building? And then I saw their workers dealing with the dump site breach.
Circumstantial or not, all these answers seem to lead directly to them. Coda looked through the alder branches towards the sky, seeming thoughtful, which you are suggesting, which means one of the smaller companies that can't afford as many properties is trying to make it look like Trolson Tech is doing this.
Or at least diverting police, guild, and peacekeepers' suspicion onto Trolson,
Maren said. That could make sense. In terms of human trafficking, this is an odd way to go about it.
What do you mean?
Usually, when masses of people go missing, they usually go to particular locations that promise credits for simple tasks. People show up, hoping for an easy prize.
and then are taken for whatever nefarious purpose the traffickers have. Most situations like this are not born from fake service vehicles taking people off the street. So your theory of a smaller company doing that to throw suspicion onto a larger one is sound, if said company's motivation is confusing.
Maren chuckled. And it might not even be them. What if the company or group that's doing this plotted it so well all these clues we found have led us into the complete opposite direction?
Their plan is rather complicated, Coda said. That is why there are so many trails to follow. Too many moving parts. That is why our plan is simple, so it can work.
So we wait to see what Mav says?
Coda nodded. Hopefully, he will steer us toward the right direction. Hopefully, that direction will lead us to either SECO or CFE. Until then, we wait.
So we split up, Maren said. Gotta make it look coincidental that you ran into me. If we're together the entire time, I'm sure Celine would be able to find video feed and use it against you.
Thought the same thing myself. I will go towards Central Arena, very slowly.
And I'll head south. But who knows? Maybe my sense of direction gets lost in my wanderlust and I find myself eventually going north.
Then try and stay out of trouble, Coda said, adopting a pseudo-authoritative voice. He began walking away. I would hate to have to bring you to the police.
How will I know which company to hit? Maren asked.
Without turning around, Coda said, listen to bird calls. Cardinal for SECO, J for CFE, Goldfinch for Trolson, Pigeon for nothing, and we need to regroup. The tune will be a simple peacekeeper code that you'll be able to pick up.
I don't know what most of those sound like.
Then figure it out. Coda's voice was getting smaller. You've got time. The city might as well have not existed. Mav had a target, and no skyscraper, nor shopping plaza, nor sporting complex, nor little park, nor the hundreds of bars would slow him down. I defend the innocent. Mav approached a plaza. The next right led to his destination, the Palace of the Sacred Skies Guild. No matter what happens to me, I defend the weak. Nothing will distract me from. Then he made the right. A garden filled most of the space. A single wide walkway split the massive lawn. On either side stood dozens, if not hundreds, of different kinds of flowers. Their reds, violets, yellows, and pinks contrasting the pure white sculptures that stood among them. The many figures struck heroic or intimidating poses. Little additions to the sculptures added to their wonder. Fire crackled at the feet or along the shoulders and arms of flame dancers. Water spouted from the fingertips or palms of wave leapers, forming fountains beneath them. Landshakers stood amongst outcroppings of stone, sand, and tree roots, all of which created swirling patterns around them. Small yet powerful fans blasted air in random directions around the windweavers. And two ethereal leaders, a man and a woman, sat back to back in the center of the garden in a meditative pose. Admirers wandered the garden, some wide-eyed and mouth agape, while others were merely appreciative of the garden's beauty, only dwarfed by what dominated the end of the plaza. Even at a glance, the Sacred Skies Palace was more impressive than the Eternal Effigies Manor. Its front was similar to many Titanian church designs. Soaring fluted columns, topped with capitals of floral arrangement, held aloft a portico which stretched the entire width of the plaza. A decorated pediment depicting several impressive people employing their gifts. Much smaller figures off in the corners held their arms out, palms upward towards the wielders, as if begging for or accepting whatever charity the wielders gave. Farther behind the entrance, a massive dome topped off the palace's roof. Plenty more statues stood along the edge of the roof and the dome, often near openings that allowed natural light to sink in. Mav found his jaw had slackened. He shook his head violently, then slapped himself twice on both cheeks. He had a mission, damn it! He forged ahead, eyes on the prize. But beyond the columns, the palace's doors were huge. Weaving patterns of gold glistened among the massive doorway, which opened to an atrium that— Focus, Mav, focus! But the atrium had a heated pool. A couple guild members leaned back, eyes closed in satisfaction as steam wafted above the room. The warm vapors gave the place a mystical aura, slightly obscuring the paintings which lined the wall. One such painting was of a gargantuan titan, likely one that held domain on the wall. Its looming face had scales which either darkened or glinted due to the firelight brewing in its maw. Its long wings spanned the width of the piece, forming a shadow that enveloped the watcher in its shade. Mav shivered.
cheeks hurting from his grin. He could actually feel like he was on the wall. This incredible and horrifying creature bearing down on him. The way the artist utilized shading to— Damn it, Mav! He tore himself away from the painting, eyes narrowed on the long desk against the far wall. Several receptionists sat along it, receiving information from civilians to form contracts and doling out compensation to guild members who'd likely just completed one. A massive monitor to the left of the desk displayed the contracts, separated by open, ongoing, or closed. 2 guild members scanned through dozens of open contracts, but only 3 were still ongoing. One of them dealt with a missing person. Mav couldn't remember names for the life of him, but it was hard for him to forget a face, especially when it mattered. The woman's picture displayed on the contract had the same face as one of the 23 missing persons, and the member who'd accepted the contract had his name displayed below it. Perfect. "Where's Michael Jones?" Mav asked the scrolling members. The shorter, skinnier one jumped. She looked Mav up and down, her folded eyes narrowing. "Why? He hasn't done anything wrong." Oh, right. Coda had informed him through their code that Mav was supposed to act like a tourist and accidentally come upon information. Sacred Skies likely had a security system with its own internal video database. That lawyer shouldn't have access to it, but she also shouldn't have access to Mav and Coda's comms. It was better to be sly and make conversations seem natural, to not give more fuel to the lawyer's fire. "No, he hasn't," Mav said. "I just, am a big fan of guilds. I wanted to ask him questions about what you guys do and stuff." A perfect recovery. They'd never suspect anything now.
A peacekeeper, a fan of guilds?
The other one, a buff man, said slowly. "Yeah," Mav said. "I'm a fan of a lot of stuff. You guys, gauntlets, noodles." The woman raised an eyebrow. "One of those is very different from the others. But they all make me smile." They shared another look. Then the man laughed.
"If you like guilds, why not join one?"
The man said.
"You didn't have to sell your soul to the government."
"Easy," the woman said, placing her hand on his elbow. "I don't see it that way," Mav said. "We're all here to help people. As a peacekeeper, I can do that and travel the country. It's a win-win."
"But you gotta go where they tell you, and when they tell you,"
the man said.
"If you save up enough money in a guild, you can take vacation and travel wherever and whenever you want."
"It doesn't matter really where I go. I just want to go." "Jeb, stop trying to recruit a peacekeeper," the woman said.
"I'm not. I'm laying out his options. Besides, we couldn't host a peacekeeper going AWOL."
"Actually, I don't swear my oaths until next week."
"Oh,"
Jeb said.
"In that case, want to join Sacred Skies?"
"Jeb!" the woman said. "They trained me for 2 years," Mav said. "Taught me so much. I won't desert the peacekeepers." Besides, they told stories of deserters. People who trained as a peacekeeper but never swore the oaths. They were mocked and ridiculed by those who had once been siblings in arms, and found it next to impossible to use their gift in any beneficial way, since most places refused to employ deserters. Most eventually turned to a life of crime, and were hunted down and executed. "The boss wouldn't accept a deserter anyway," the woman said.
Yeah, I know,"
Jeb said.
"So why do you want to talk to Michael? If you just want to learn more about the guild, we can tell you."
Mav had almost forgotten why he talked to them in the first place. Titans. This being smart business was hard. "Oh, I heard about some of the stuff he's done," Mav said. "So I wanted to ask him some questions about the place." They appeared doubtful, but Jeb slowly pointed towards the entrance.
"He's in the pool, the guy on the left."
Mav thanked them, said goodbye, and charged across the hall. The man on the left side of the pool had black skin and a damp, small afro. His eyes were closed, face towards the water, looking relaxed. Casual Mav. He had to organically get information from this man, without it appearing he was looking for it. Be a tourist, act casual, but still maintain a level of professionalism expected from a peacekeeper. That was how he could discover what he was looking for. So, Mav jumped in the pool. Michael and the other guild members exclaimed at the sudden splash. "What are you doing?" Michael asked. "I just wanted to talk to you," Mav said. Michael's mouth worked for a couple of seconds in silence. The other guild member, brow furrowed, slowly left the pool. Great. Now nothing could interrupt Mav. I'm a tourist, first time in town, Mav said to fill the silence. Real big fan of you guys, and I heard about some of your work, and I had a sudden and completely random, with no other motive in mind, thought to come and ask you about them. Has there been any recent work you've done that you found interesting? Michael began. You're not supposed to be in here. But the door was open. Michael blinked. The pool. Oh, sorry. It looked comfy, though. Is it? On my face. But the water doesn't go through the uniform. Keeps my heat in. Everything else out, you know? They wouldn't want me in Yarrow's waters freezing to death, would they? I suppose not. Wait, this pool's for guild members only? Isn't it? I am so sorry. Wait, Michael said as Mav made to leave. It's fine. It's also for invited guests and, you may enter the pool. Great! Mav plopped back down. Michael's bewilderment didn't lessen. If anything, he looked more confused that he invited Mav to stay in the pool. I've worked with peacekeepers before, Michael said, but I'll admit, I've never seen interrogation tactics like this. What? Mav scoffed. Interrogation? No. I'm just a simple tourist right now, having a casual conversation about something I'm interested in. Do you need anti-itch ointment or something? Keep scratching like that, and you'll tear out all your hair. He had been scratching the back of his head again. Shit. If Michael discovered his lying tick, then Mav's mission was all but over. He had to play this off professionally. Oh no, I'm good, Mav said, forcibly removing his hand from his head and sitting on it. Why was his shoulder twitching now? Just think a bug bit me back there earlier. If you say so. Under the water, Mav made a celebratory fist. Mission was still a go. You did have lessons in interrogation though, right? Michael said. Didn't pass a single one. You don't say. But this is just a normal conversation. I'm really curious about any work you've done, especially a recent contract. Michael gave Mav a long stare. Mav had seen others do this before. Whenever somebody was defensive around him, and whenever he talked with them, there was always a point when they reevaluated him, as if they were gauging whether they could trust him. You don't work with any particular tech company or legal firm, do you? Michael asked. No. Michael watched Mav's left hand, which made no sense. The back of Mav's head didn't feel remotely itchy. Michael's jaw set and he gave a little nod. All right. I started investigating a missing person 6 days ago. I learned quickly that 4 others had gone missing too. I investigated all of them, trying to find similarities between them. You find anything about the service vehicles? Michael chuckled and shook his head. After talking to the police, they didn't help much since they were preparing for the festival today. And I couldn't get much help from my own cohort for the same reason. But I eventually was allowed to look at some videos. Those service vehicles were the only clue I got. That took me a day to do. And by then, 3 more people had been kidnapped. I tailed one of the service vehicles the next day, but I didn't see them take anyone. Instead, they led me to a warehouse near the spire. But after some digging and owing a few favors to friends in high-up places, I learned that the government doesn't operate out of that warehouse. A conglomerate that owns a bunch of businesses in the city does. So, the next day I went to the branches to conduct some interviews. I felt like I was on the right track. Then, a lawyer told you to stop. A Miss Hicks was very thorough. Had signed documentation from that damned governor that this investigation would be handled by local peacekeepers, which they would begin in earnest after the festival. I offered my evidence, but she told me that I would not be necessary for the official investigation. But she said nothing about a casual conversation with an interested tourist. Exactly! And I am very interested in those companies you went to. Rosin Power, Grant Incorporated, Secker Research, and even Dustin Cosmetics of all places. They're in an impressive part of town, and pretty close to each other, except for Dustin. I recommend that you visit them. Mav squeezed the man's shoulder. Thank you for that interesting information. Michael nodded, a fire in his eyes. Good luck, casual tourist. I hope you enjoy these places. It was unfortunate that plans involving other people had to account for their free will. If Coda could control everything, then they wouldn't even be in this predicament. But here he was, wandering through the administrative district.
inching his way towards Central Tower, entirely reliant upon others. Not that he was waiting, per se. Coda took note of all the buildings in the area that had security cameras facing the street, which was a lot more than he'd like. He'd also used his gift to see the sewer system below, which lay next to a different set of tunnels that connected many of the largest tower's basements. Some of those basements blurred Coda's vision. A spatial distortion field kept prying eyes from specific companies' research. The biggest companies like Trolson Tech and Nadar had those, but frustratingly so did smaller ones like CFE and Seco Research. Simultaneously, he kept a gifted eye on the civilian, who'd spent a while in that park before she went south, then took some side streets west before heading north. Now she was making her way to the administrative district. Blanket wrapped tightly around her, looking at the buildings with an appreciative eye. She could have been a natural tourist amazed by the sights. Were only Mav so smart? Coda let his gift rest a moment. The black world only colored by white outlines vanished, to the city's grays and a pale blue sky. His skull was starting to pound. Looked like seeing two things at once was still too much for him. He couldn't have been able to see Mav even if he tried. Not that it would make a difference. Mav's pure heart and straightforward demeanor could be a detriment to gathering information. But who would suspect him, of all people, to stealthily glean useful data from a guild, which most likely had been given their own cease and desist order regarding their investigation? In particular, a guild which Coda knew didn't like to share information with outsiders, especially peacekeepers. So any information Mav discovered there couldn't legally penalize them. If he got information. If he did it right. Too many ifs for Coda's liking. Then, nearly an hour after Mav charged to the Sacred Skies Palace, a message came in. From Mav. It was a long, paragraphs upon paragraphs detailing the garden and the palace. Coda gave a soft chuckle. Sorry I keep doubting you, man. Not only did Mav give no indication that he'd interrogated Sacred Skies members, though he did make friends, he added plenty of exclamations and random capitalized words, which he did in his casual messages when he was excited. And through their code, Mav gave him names of 4 companies Sacred Skies was suspicious of. Of his 4 and Coda's 3, only one matched. Seco Research. Coda sent a quick reply, secretly informing Mav of what to do next. In a little over an hour, Coda would inform the civilian, who, by now, would have her own plan of action. Then Coda continued his meandering, keeping an eye on the civilian yet again with his gift. If I ever hear another pigeon after this, Maren thought, watching the chubby gray nuisances pitter-patter across the sidewalk, cooing incessantly, it'll be too soon. There were pros and cons to this clandestine form of communication. Coda had picked birds that lived in the area, so anyone who might hear one's calls shouldn't be too suspicious. However, picking common birds which frequented the green spaces of the city, even the gray ones in the pigeons' cases, meant almost every chirp and tweet could be a signal of Maren's target. So now that she'd memorized the sounds played from her tablet in the park, she wandered the city keeping an ear out for bird sounds. She remained calm whenever a trill reached her ear, glancing about and smiling at the little birds making the noise. Coda had said the calls would be in an easy peacekeeper code, and all of the tweets so far had been the random and natural birdsong. So there shouldn't have been much to worry about. Just pick up the pattern of Coda's call. Simple, right? But those cursed pigeons! They were at almost every corner of the city. She hadn't even noticed them before. But now they were wherever she turned, cooing, staring at her with blank, soulless eyes of the damned. Wait, that pigeon's plumage looked familiar. Were these birds following her? Did Celine Hicks somehow train a legion of pigeons to conduct covert espionage missions on possible antagonists to her wicked lawyerly schemes? Maren chuckled, then jotted down the idea on her tablet. Could make for a fun and surprising part of a story. Or inane and unbelievable. She'd look back on it in a couple of weeks to see how she liked it. She shrunk her tablet, then stopped. She'd look up the bird calls on it. If Celine had access to the Peacekeeper's private comms, then she should easily be able to gain access to a civilian's search history. By the end of this, Maren would undoubtedly be discovered in this plot. It was entirely possible that Coda would make his bird call in the hearing range of a camera. Were Celine to have access to Maren's searches, she would claim that Coda disobeyed her orders. That would be grounds for a dishonorable discharge, even before he swore his oaths. So, did he figure that the odds of that occurring were so slim it was worth the risk? Or did his plan make it so he would contact her outside the range of any cameras to avoid the problem altogether? Or, Maren's stomach clenched, he could have surmised the truth about how high a level of security clearance one would need to access all of Maren's data. A bird call struck her like a bolt. It followed a simple rhythmic pattern. 3 clear chirps that went down in pitch, then 3 two-parted whistles that sped up and ended in a low trill, then back again to the 3 clear chirps. A cardinal call. And it came from an alley between 2 apartment buildings, one that was devoid of cameras and empty save for several dumpsters. So likely, Coda's plan revolved around his signal not getting discovered in the first place. Good. Maren, for the most part, enjoyed working with Coda, and Mav was a good guy, if a little slow. She'd hate to distance herself from them, especially with a job to do. The cardinal song rang again. I heard you. Maren pulled out her tablet and loaded the map she'd made of the blocks surrounding Secco Research, including the sewer system and private service tunnels. Time to go. In times like these, it was always good for Mav to let himself enjoy the sights. The square he marveled at was the busiest he'd seen yet. Yes, the citizens gave him an annoyingly wide berth, and many gave nervous glances behind them. But it was nice to see that most of the people were being normal, honest-to-goodness people. Many crowded the massive theaters in which plays and performances were staged. The theaters themselves weren't as physically impressive as the Sacred Skies Palace or any of the massive temples he'd passed on the way here, but there was something charming about the red and yellow brick buildings breaking the monotony of the dull gray in the rest of the city. Getting lost in the wonder was easy for him. Waiting for Coda's signal to move was not. Mav trusted Coda with his life. His buddy undoubtedly had a good reason for this long delay, but patience had never been Mav's virtue. Then the message came. Hey man, head to Central. They don't have a match, but you'd like the look of the place. Mav beamed, his heart skipping a beat. He gave one final glance to the families talking and laughing with each other before making his way towards Central Arena, which, oh so coincidentally, would bring Mav near Secco Research.
Maren had several ideas for how she could get into Secco Research's development division. All viable, and her favored ones even above the book. Most of them, however, were dashed the moment the skyscraper came into view. The building blended into the crowd of matching edifices on a normal day, but Maren assumed the security guards didn't usually form barricades around the building, waving passers-by and curious onlookers away. All were armed with batons, riot shields, and were those miniature flamethrowers? A quick search informed Maren that power outages had occurred in this area for the last hour. The outages stretched over a mile's radius. Secco Research was near the center of the cone. Most of the reserve power was directed to a nearby hospital on its edge, which meant Maren opened a new browser on her tablet and did another search. She smirked. Secco's security cameras were offline. In fact, all the cameras in the area were blank. Finally, a break. Maren ducked into a side street several blocks from Secco Research's building. Following her map, a manhole lay unguarded on a deserted street. A quick glance didn't reveal random people staring at her from the surrounding buildings. Plan 5 it is. But where were the guys when she needed them? Frowning, she squatted over the manhole, gripped the edges, and heaved. Arms trembling and back threatening to bend, Maren's legs did the literal heavy lifting. She raised the cover a couple of inches, then scooted it to the side. Her breath escaped her as she set the cover down. The putrid sewer smell smacked her in the face. Grimacing, stomach roiling, she lowered herself into the stench's source. Didn't matter where on Talum, whether it was the humblest hamlet or the mightiest metropolis. Sewers still smelled like shit. That was all she could focus on, as the only light source was the manhole she'd removed. All ceiling lights were dead due to the power outage. The revolting brown-green waters churned, blessedly not lapping over the edge onto the platform Maren had landed upon. According to the map, she had to walk against the bastardized water's flow. Even while dry on the platform, facing the rushing sludge seemed to send the stench directly into her nostrils. Holding in gags, she followed the map's route, lit by her tablet's flashlight. She made a right and then stopped several hundred feet later at an indistinct wall. There should have been a door leading to the tunnels that the companies used to bring their waste to the dump sites. But even shining her light onto the wall, no visible creases or grooves to outline a doorway were illuminated. clever bastards.
It's likely more obvious on the other side, a voice said.
Maren flinched, shining her light at the new arrival. Coda stood, nonplussed, staring at the door. Maren placed a hand on her chest, her suddenly rapid heartbeat calming with a deep breath. I didn't even hear you.
Helps for covert missions,
Coda said. His stare became distant, then he nodded. That brick can be removed, revealing a lock. Maren investigated where Coda pointed, but the brick in question looked just as firmly in place as the rest. You able to get us in? Maren asked. Coda nodded.
But we're really close to Seco Research's basement.
They have some tech that's messing with my sight, so I can't see what's beyond the door. Most of the power from the outages should be going to the hospital. How do they have enough to maintain that spatial tech?
Probably diverting some of that power to themselves. Just another crime to add to the list.
And because of that, we don't know if there's chaos in there, or a whole lot of nothing.
And anywhere in between.
We waiting on Mav?
Coda shook his head.
He's back up. I want to get this done as quietly as possible. And he...
Right. Those explosions she'd heard hours ago had been the opposite of subtle.
So what are we waiting for?
You.
Really? I know I'm a civilian, but I'm just doing this job and there's...
Not what I meant. How'd you know about the secret tunnel's location?
Maren gulped, thankfully inaudibly, so he was suspicious.
I don't see what that has to do with this.
And the lawyer barely gave you a glance. I thought it could have been because you're a civilian, so she didn't care. But then you updated your map, knowing that if she accessed that data, it could be used against you in court. She had access to my comms. Clearly, it means she could get into your device, right? Unless she couldn't.
Thought a lot about this, huh?
I wasn't mulling over strategies for 2 hours.
You could have just asked me about it. I have this.
She displayed her tunnel map.
Because I was a member of Radiant Dawn. Being part of the nation's oldest, largest, and most profitable guild gives one certain advantages.
She was impressed with herself. Her voice wasn't level, nor was it cracking easily. Her intonation was the same as always, just like her eye contact whenever she spoke casually. Direct for a few seconds, with occasional glances away. She'd practiced these responses 1,000 times, but never with a real person, nor with her heart thundering in her chest. You're not in that guild anymore, Coda said, and I doubt they'd give any members this much access. Even I need a warrant to download the city's secret grid.
You looked at my file. You know I lived at Radiant Dawn since I was 5. I'm not just any member, and you're not even a private yet.
But you're no longer a part of Radiant Dawn.
I left on good terms with everyone. They're still precious to me, and I to them. They let me keep access to their privileges as a parting gift.
Which means you can look into information Hicks wouldn't be able to access?
Not without royally pissing off one of Talem's most important entities, all to guard the privacy of a relatively new tech company. Again, I wasn't in the lower tier of Radiant Dawn.
Coda's eyes bored into Maren's. She held them, trying not to waver. If he hadn't turned away when he did, however, she might have folded. His glare was so intense.
Fine, Coda said, looking at the wall. Either you're telling the truth, or as good a liar as me.
With a small hiss, a door slid open, revealing a pitch-black hallway, and various noises Maren couldn't make out.
Guess it's not a whole lot of nothing, huh? Maren said.
Coda stepped into the hallway, grabbed my shoulder, and turned that off. We don't want to lose our element of surprise. Maren huffed, but did as he said. His shoulder piece was solid, smoother yet sturdier than most fabrics she'd felt. Even with how skinny Coda was, it gave the impression of strength beyond his physique, and that strong shoulder led her through the blackness, towards the sounds that Maren could now recognize. Screams and grunts, a violent whirl of air and flame, rending metal and fizzles of sparks, wet, guttural growls. The last of which grew at an alarming rate, rapid pounding footsteps echoing about them.
Give me a light,
Coda commanded. Maren turned the tablet's flashlight on and passed it to Coda, who jutted to the side and shined the light down the barren hallway. Well, barren aside from those monstrosities hurtling towards her.
Deal with them, Coda said.
Maren's mouth was already parched, rivulets of water rushing down her arm and upper palm, forming pressurized streams that diced the three monsters before her. Before she opened her mouth to inform Coda about their regenerative ability, the pieces were suddenly spread apart and forced against the wall. Right. Coda knew that part from her report.
More incoming, Coda said, shining the light down the hallway. And so's a man.
The two following bulging beasts were as simple as the first. It was the man, tailed by three other deformities that made things a little bit more troublesome.
Don't send this one to the ER, Coda said.
Wasn't planning on it, Maren said.
The man was tall, more than a foot taller than her, with broad shoulders and arms large enough to seamlessly carry two full-sized flamethrowers. He turned back periodically, firing a wave of flame towards the monsters, but continued charging towards Maren. Water swirled around Maren from her skin. The man snarled at her.
"Who the hell are you?"
he roared, pointing the barrel of his flamethrower at her. Her water formed a wall before he touched the trigger. Steam filled the corridor as the water hissed. Maren's mouth continually dried as she replenished the shield, waiting for the monsters to reach him. However, the large man simply turned to the side, one arm sending flames towards Maren, then pointed his other at the beasts edging up on him. Soon the flames shot from both sides of the man.
Little help?
Maren asked.
You got this, Coda said.
Maren took a swig of water from her canteen. She wasn't too dehydrated, but the heat was beginning to make the world shift around her. All she had to do was remove the man's weapons, and he was good as beaten. Mouth drying more, she sent a stream of water along the hallway's ceiling, away enough from the fire to not evaporate, and gathered it above the man. Curling her fingers, she pressurized the ceiling water at 4 points, then shot them downwards. The man wailed, 4 streams of water smacking into his arms and shoulder. Not powerful enough to sail through them, but definitely painful. The fires receded as the flamethrower's barrels hit the floor. Maren sent her wave forward to envelop him as the beast charged. His scream was drowned out by the water covering his face, as were the guttural growls behind him. Even in the water, the beasts reached for the man.
He's not for you,
Maren mumbled, splitting the water and dragging the man towards her, leaving the monsters in their own floating bubble down the hallway. Coda stepped forward as the man's water bubble neared, delving his hand inside it and wrenching a flamethrower free.
Let them go.
Maren released the water holding the monsters back, but kept the man inside of his bubble. He thrashed, attempting to escape, but Maren held the water together. The flamethrower hissed, drying, and then quickly scorched the sliced pieces against the wall. The full-bodied monsters, however, took longer to burn. All the while, the man's movements slowed.
Now!
Maren released the water right before he ceased moving. He hit the ground, coughing and drawing in deep breaths. Maren knew it wasn't sporting to kick a man while he was down, but it was smart. She got him good on the temple, sending him into the wall. He lay, groaning, fumbling, but awake.
At least he won't need the hospital.
Coda removed the cylinder which fueled the flamethrower, then threw the weapon to the ground. Most of the beasts were now crisps, the smell of their singed, goopy skin twisting Maren's nostrils. One, however, was curled in on itself, its limbs practically melding into its torso, held against the wall.
Thanks for the help,
Maren said, voice dry.
Conserving all the energy I can, Coda said.
The fumbling man jerked to Coda, then rested next to the grotesque creature.
Interesting.
He's wearing a Trollson Tech uniform. Maren took her tablet and shined the light on him.
Same kind I saw at the dump site, and you called me conspiratorial.
You were, but
You were also correct. Do you know if Sekko and Trollson have any major disputes?
Not apart from the average small dog nipping at the big one's heels.
Another crash sounded in the distance.
More are coming,
Coda said, kneeling to physically grab both the man and the monster.
Get out of here quickly. I have all I need.
Why don't we go to the police together?
Maren asked.
With all this, it should be.
I'm not going to the police. Not yet. Flames spurted down the hallway, and winds roared alongside the guttural calls of the creatures.
Go,
Coda said. What he did next made Maren pause, if only for a second. One moment he was illuminated by Maren's light. The next, he, the man in the Trollson Tech uniform, and the monster were all gone. Not only had she met an ethereal leader, she'd met one who can fold. Then that second ended, and the thunderous sound of footsteps neared her. These occasions were terrifying, even for Coda. The whitened outlines of his targets neared, closer and closer to his position. Then the black swallowed him, transferring him to the new space that had moved to meet him. If he concentrated, if he had enough strength to reappear. Again, more ifs than he'd like to deal with. He'd already used his gift quite a lot today, whether to fly, move people around, or view distant areas. The more he invited the blackness, the easier it was to slip into. This fold could, after all he'd done today, leave him in the shadow's embrace, keeping him from the light of the physical world forever. But it was a risk he had to take. There was no other way he could have barged into the office of Seco Research's CEO so easily. The blackness receded, and Coda knelt on a plush rug, holding both the near-unconscious man and the wriggling experiment that would likely mar the extravagant floor piece. Coda held in a sigh of relief, forcing his vision entirely into the physical world. The office was as luxurious as any average CEO's. A long room at the peak of a skyscraper that provided a decent view of the Linux skyline. In one half, closest to the door, was a more personal space, with a long table with several chairs surrounding it. Shelves along the wall likely held glasses and various bottles of alcohol to provide to guests. In the other, a cluttered desk blocked another wall with even more shelves, likely holding the good alcohol for special guests, and the CEO himself. Speaking of whom, the businessman, David Fujita, sat at his desk, arguing with a dark-skinned woman standing on the other side. Coda, who'd appeared on the more personable half of the room, hadn't caught their attention yet. Dropping the man and the monstrosity onto the desk between them was an easy way to do it. Both leaped back, screaming. The woman reached for her tablet, but Coda yanked it from her grip with his gift. The black flared his vision, far more potent than usual. He blinked, gaining more control and returning his sight to normal. He couldn't use his gift much until he rested. Not after that fold.
"What is this?" the man said. "How dare you burst into my office like some rebellious miscreant? Who's your CEO? Doesn't matter. I can report you to the highest."
"I wouldn't be so high and mighty after what I found in your basement," Coda said. "So if you would kindly admit to all your misdeeds, we can skip all the complicated stuff and bring you to prison." The CEO narrowed his eyes, dark and folded in the corners, like most people with Nicwogan blood. The experiment barely moved, now practically a massive blob staining his desk. The man in the Trollson Tech uniform twitched, then fumbled to the floor.
I hope you know how many laws this violates,
the woman said. The woman's recent hostile demeanor towards the CEO had vanished. Now she cowered, wide eyes fearfully stuck on the uneven blob, their whites in stark contrast with her deep ebony skin. "Absolutely none," Coda said. "I followed a civilian I found suspicious in the sewers. While I was in there, though, creatures like that and this man assaulted her."
"So bring it to the police,"
the CEO said.
"Or interrogate Genna Trollson, not me."
"There's no reason for Trollson's CEO to be in a state of emergency, like you are."
"What emergency? We're only discussing terms for our latest deal."
"That have anything to do with kidnapping people and conducting inhuman experiments on them?"
"What in the name of the ethereal titans are you on about?"
Besides, the woman put in, I know for certain there have been several cease and desist orders regarding the kidnappings, both to guilds and outside peacekeepers.
"Curious how you're aware of these orders. Then again, you have used Polk in Austin a number of times for your legal worries."
"And what do they have to do with this?"
the CEO said. He was a much better pretender than the woman. His face showed nothing but bafflement and incredulity. The woman, however, shifted her glances. She even bit her lower lip. "You've already outed yourself," Coda said. "How would you know about the orders for the investigation unless you were involved or had friends who were?"
Doesn't matter,
the woman said.
You still disobeyed the orders.
They said nothing about investigating a suspicious individual or defending oneself from an atrocity like this.
I still haven't the faintest idea what this is,
the CEO said.
Then why are you on lockdown? Coda asked.
Just a safety precaution.
What we always do when something goes wrong in
the woman began.
Natasha!
The woman pressed her lips into a line, then looked down. Doesn't take a genius to figure that out, Coda said. So, what has gone wrong in research and development? Nothing to coincidentally do with this, right?
The door leading to the hallway slammed open. A man rushed in, sweating and panting. David, Sir, what's this about?
It's nothing, the CEO said. We were just going to get security to escort this confused peacekeeper and his findings off the premises.
Oh, well, the man floundered. The rest of them are a little preoccupied with, another issue.
Another?
The CEO roared, apparently forgetting to act cool and calm around Coda.
What else has gone wrong?
Right on time.
Coda viewed the surrounding area with his gift, making certain it was all working as planned. Lit only by her tablet's light, Maren fled. As she approached the opening to the sewer, the rancid smell returning, she contemplated closing the tunnel door. But those voices and footsteps were gaining on her, and she didn't know how to seal the door shut. So she pumped her legs as fast as she could and streamed from the tunnel. Not too far. Maren dashed alongside the running muck that called itself water. Only a couple 100 feet. She made a left and something whizzed by her back, whipping her hair to the right. A cry sounded, then silenced as a resounding splash scattered the disgusting water through the air. Maren leaped and twisted into the air, her light illuminating two monsters turning the corner. From this close, she could see they didn't have openings on their faces, only indentations where their eyes and a mouth should be. Despite her adrenaline, her skin crawled. As Maren landed and continued fleeing, she took a deep breath, held, and then reached for the sewage water. A small wave roared, crashing into the beasts. They hit the sewer wall, and then were pulled into the flowing sludge. The manhole Maren had climbed down was covered, likely by Coda. Looked like she'd have to heave that thing from below to escape. As she climbed the ladder to it, though, more grunts and curses sounded from the corner. More were behind her. She practically soared up the ladder and embarrassingly and painfully bonked her head on the manhole. She pushed, but it didn't budge. Flames blasted about 20 feet away at a creature that was running towards the ladder. Heart going a mile a minute, Maren pushed both her hands on the manhole, feet planted on the ladder to keep her from falling. With a huge heave and after an agonizing second, the manhole creaked open. The monster reached the ladder. Only 10 feet away, several men's voices close behind it. She gripped the edges and then pulled. Blessed light poured into the sewer, providing freedom. Despite it being only halfway open, Maren pulled herself to the surface. The manhole surged skyward, then crashed onto an empty sidewalk. The monster vaulted from the sewer and crawled towards Maren. Before she could slice this one, however, a man literally flew from the manhole and hovered between her and the creature. Violent gales buffeted her, coming from the hands and feet of the man, who also wore a Trolson Tech uniform. A Windweaver. A single-wielder opponent wasn't the end of the world. She'd already sent one to the hospital. But one that was backed up by 4 men, each armed with flamethrowers? That would make things a little bit more difficult.
Take your time, boys,
the Windweaver said, his otherwise handsome dark face morphed by his sneer. This won't take long. Maren shot a powerful stream at the man. A gust from his palm forced the water to flow around him, but also sent him 10 feet backwards. So he wasn't too skilled with his power. Few wielders outside of official organizations were, but what they lacked in skill, they usually made up for in violence. Maren smirked, reaching for the water that had shot behind the Windweaver. As he was readjusting himself in the air, she gathered the water and slammed it into the man's back. Not expecting the attack, he couldn't stop the little wave from dashing him into the street. Maren made to flee. Lord only knew what they'd do to her if she lost this fight. She didn't have to win, only escape. One of the men, however, was standing in her intended route. 2 more moved to flank her, while the 4th was burning the monstrosity. The other 3, however, had their flamethrowers fixed upon her. Maren's mouth parched as she prepared for her assault.
Leave her to me.
The Windweaver roared, wobbling. Blood poured from his forehead.
We need to do this fast,
the one to Maren's left said.
Ego can't get in the way of.
Maren threw her arms to the side and spun. Small geysers erupted from her palms, blasting the assailants back. She was dashing away before they hit the ground. She only made it halfway down the street, though, before the winds picked up behind her. She vaulted to the side, just as the Windweaver rushed by. He nearly slammed into the ground, but a downward gale kept him aloft.
Not so fast, girlie, he said.
How original.
Maren wrapped a halo of water around her head, swirling and ready to strike. The man flew forward and then clapped his hands. A torrent rushed through the street, buffeting Maren. The halo slid behind her back, her body keeping it from scattering. Maren's shoes scraped over the asphalt, but she leaned against the wind and managed to keep her footing. The water whipped out when the wind died, slapping the Windweaver in the cheek and sending him to the ground. To her right, flames reached for her. She stomped the street and water spewed up, protecting her from the fire. Though two more men circled around her, one in front and the other behind.
Really getting tired of fire,
Maren grumbled. Before the two other assailants could get into place, she sent a jet of water towards them, knocking them down again. But while they soared away, the last thug ran to her, speaking through a comm in his ear. All the while, the Windweaver began getting up, and Maren's mouth was practically dry.
Curse it!
She couldn't be reckless with her power. She concentrated a portion of her water shield. That area shrunk and then shot out in a stream, sailing through her attacker's shoulder. She sent a similar stream of water through the legs of the one talking, while she removed her canteen from her bag. Before she could press it to her lips, though, a violent gust flung it to the side of a building. The Windweaver, bloodied and wobbly, snarled at her, his hands outstretched from his previous attack.
All right, plan B.
Even with a parched mouth, she'd have enough water to deal with the remaining three assailants. A few more quick bursts through non-lethal body parts and... From both sides of the street, security guards who'd surrounded Secker Research's building appeared. Without a word, about a dozen men armed with riot shields and batons closed in on her. Fighting 5 armed men was one thing, but 20? How would she get out of this now? Mav knew why Coda wanted him to wait, as things had the odd habit of exploding or at least catching flame whenever he tried to be stealthy. But it didn't mean he had to like it. What he couldn't understand, however, was why he had to wait so far away from Secker Research's building. Attempting to stay away from suspicion was one thing. Keeping backup over a mile away from the action was complete overkill. If they needed help, instead of being around the block, he was near a bunch of high-class restaurants where rich civilians were enjoying their first courses of their Thanksgiving feast. To top it all off, Mav couldn't even exercise to deal with his nerves. So instead, he paced, causing many civilians to shift nervous glances at him. Coda has a plan. It had become a mantra, beaten into his brain over and over again during the hour that he waited. There's a reason he's keeping me far away. I have to trust him. Then a message finally came from Coda. Hands full. Civilian in danger. Needs help. Blecker Street, between 4th and 5th Ave. Looked like pretense was dead. Mav was already sprinting towards Secker Research before he put the exact address in. 1.2 miles. Mav's motions flowed in a steady rhythm, the city speeding past. Hang on for just 5 minutes, Maren. Just push past it. Maren wished she could remove that cursed voice from her memory. Nothing good came from remembering Phoenix. She lost herself when he came to mind, which she couldn't afford. Control was key. Without it, there was no way Maren could escape this. But his voice ceaselessly rang in her ears, the calling cry to her damnation. Just push past it. Maren roared, stomping her foot on the ground. Water she couldn't waste spurted from her legs and spread throughout the street. 9 men on the right, 11 on the left. The wave suffused them all, but it barely pushed them back. For all of her efforts, the world listed beneath her, her head pounding against her skull. Did she have any water left? Just push past it. Maren breathed in, bringing her hands to her chest. The water returned, sweeping some men off their feet. She couldn't create any more water. She'd use everything available to her. I don't need to push. Maren narrowed her eyes, focusing. I need control. She gathered water along her left pointer finger and pinky fingers, aiming for the Windweaver. He surged away before she took the shot, her streams blasting into, but not through, a riot shield. Work with it. Maren sent another pressurized stream through the man's knee. He screamed, buckling into another man who Maren gave the same treatment. Just keep control. On the right, 3 men neared, raising batons. Maren swept her water to the side, colliding with their flanks and sending them sprawling. She twisted her head on a swivel, noticing the thugs with flamethrowers coming close. Water lashed out, sweeping away weapons, and a gust of wind battered her into the street, her head bouncing off the asphalt. Stars swam in her vision, a group of men surrounded her. Hurry. That was all Coda's message said. Not even a minute after the last, Mav grunted, picking up the pace. He protected those who couldn't defend themselves, but that didn't mean he wouldn't lend a hand to the strong. He wouldn't let anything happen to Maren. He couldn't and still be called a peacekeeper. Maybe Phoenix had a point. Maybe instead of reaching her limit and backing down, she should have charged past her comfort zone and acquired the greatness the rest of Radiant Dawn claimed to see in her. If Maren had, maybe she'd have been strong enough to handle all of these assailants. Maybe she wouldn't be lying in a puddle, half a dozen men reaching for her. Just push past it. Eyes closed tight, though still feeling dry. She concentrated at a dozen points in the puddle and pushed. Little geysers shot at the men, not powerful enough to cross through the skin and muscle, but enough to wound them. I'm not done yet. Maren rose and then stumbled. The men around her were still standing, though several held onto their wounds and bore grimaces. She collected the water, both on the ground and in the sky around her, then propelled another wave into them. 2 more men reached for her, but she slid between them, aided by the water, and rose, blasting them from behind with more streams. You won't take me while I stand. Another small wave toppled 3 more men, leaving an opening to her left. She took off, but found herself listing to the left in her dizziness. A firm hand grabbed her shoulder, then promptly released it as she shot gallons of water into his sternum. 2 more charged, ready to ram her with riot shields. She formed tendrils from the water in the road and submerged their shields, then ripped them from the guards. Another 3 men clutched their abdomens as Maren's streams collided into them. Then another 3 reached for her. She shot out her arm, but only a sputtering drizzle hit them. Her head throbbed. Wearied muscles made her arms droop. And as she fell, 2 men grabbed her and then pulled her over one of their shoulders. Try all she might, she couldn't protest, nor even open her eyes, let alone have the strength to flee. 4.5 minutes. Mav had never run a faster mile, and he'd technically run more than that. Each step, which should have exhausted him, rocketed him forwards. Maren was counting on him. He wouldn't let her down. Then he turned onto Blecker Street between 4th and 5th Ave. Emptiness, aside from scattered puddles of water and spatterings of blood, were all that remained. No! Mav, panting, ambled through the street, looking around. Nothing was there. Not a single person, even inside the nearby buildings, remained. I failed again, he shouted, throwing his arms down, the flames of his fury blasting the street.
Those morons, Seco's CEO yelled, attacking a wielder in the street?
We're within our full legal right to apprehend civilians trespassing in forbidden zones, the man who'd reported the security guard's activity said.
No wielder is ever just a civilian, Tobias. If we were seen assaulting a wielder on today of all days...
She's a wave leaper, sir.
The CEO slammed both palms on his desk, red in the face.
That doesn't fucking matter.
The man, Tobias, put a finger to his ear, then nodded.
They got her. Took most of our guys, but she's been apprehended.
Which meant Mav hadn't made it. Coda opened up his arm protector, then found a map of Linux on the screen. There was a high probability that they were dragging her to the other kidnapped victims. He marked the spot in the sewers which connected with the secret tunnels. He sent it to Mav shortly. "Where are you taking her?" Coda asked.
To prison, of course,
The CEO said. "The police are supposed to be too busy dealing with the festival. If they won't even investigate 23 kidnappings, you think they'll take time out of their day for this?"
Your point?
Coda gestured to the bulbous monstrosity in front of him. "You still haven't answered for this. She was doing work, not hindered by orders." He glanced at the dark woman, who turned away. "This thing attacked her, and now your men have wrongfully imprisoned her. All under my watchful gaze. How are you supposed to defend yourselves?"
I don't need to defend myself because I've done nothing wrong.
Not true from where I'm standing.
I don't have time for this.
Then make it. Because I'm not leaving until you confess and all the living victims are released, including the wielder girl. The CEO faced the window, his profile darkened by the room's dim light, and took a breath. Coda held in a curse. A raging man was more likely to say something he'd regret later. A calm one would be harder to extract information from.
Leave my office at once.
The CEO's voice was level, controlled.
If not, then I will demand a court-martial from your CEO. We may not be the largest company, but we benefit all mankind. Our leaders recognize that, so we are afforded better treatment from its enforcers than this.
Not according to the law, Coda said. Not when heinous shit like this is happening in your basement.
Like I said, we've done nothing wrong.
This man didn't shirk from Coda's glare. His eyes were hardened, determined to combat Coda at every chance. Then you wouldn't be opposed to showing me your research and development wing, Coda said. Now the man blanched.
It's dangerous down there.
You don't say. Coda pointedly eyed the monstrous blob on the desk.
But it has nothing to do with that.
Would you mind explaining the situation to me, then, so I could gather all of the facts? If I find your problems have nothing to do with what I found beneath your building, I'll be on my way. Sir, the younger man said, voice hesitant, is there really time for this? You need to oversee these issues. The CEO looked around the room at his associates, the knocked out man on the floor, the bulging creature on his desk, then finally Coda. He sighed.
Fine, but later. I have much to look over, but for now, I hope this will hold you over. There's been a gas leak, a dangerous one. It is contained, and we are dealing with it. Wait until it's safer, and I will prove our innocence in this.
And in the time Coda waited, Mav would make his move. That would cause enough chaos for Coda to slip away and acquire what he really came for. Works for me, Coda said.
Natasha, find him a room to wait in, and cage up that thing. I'll speak with you, Sir Peacekeeper, as soon as I've dealt with this mess.
Just don't take too long. Maren's destination was eerily akin to her journey. Whether in the tunnels or the cell, rare fluttering lights cut through the darkness, bunched bodies huddled nearby, all whimpering or whispering in anxious voices. And the world spun around her whenever she tried to move. Not to mention the dryness hollowing her throat, cracking her lips and flaking her skin. She needed water, but they wouldn't give her any. Maybe a few drops to keep her alive eventually, but not as much as she'd need to escape.
What's your name?
A woman who grabbed Maren's shoulder whispered.
By the Titans, what's happened to you? You're as rough as the desert.
Maren,
She croaked.
need water.
The woman sighed.
We don't have any. They feed us once a day, but they regularly come by to...
Who's speaking?
A voice roared. A light flashed on, shining through a wall of glass. At least 20 bodies were cramped into the cell half the size of Maren's old room in the Radiant Dawn Palace. Most flinched away from the light, covering their faces. A few men glared at the light bearer, but none more than the middle-aged woman gripping Maren's shoulder.
She needs something to drink, she said.
The man scoffed.
Like we give her ammunition. She'll get a couple drops once everything's calmed down, and no more talking.
He dramatized his final sentence by slamming the butt of a weapon, likely a flamethrower, against the glass. Most of the captives flinched at the sound. The thug walked away down the hallway, taking the light with him.
Titans above, the woman breathed. Are you a wielder? Did you come to save us? Yeah.
There was an uncomfortable pause. Then the woman said,
Can you get us out of here, or do you have any backup? No, and maybe.
Coda would inform Mav where the entrance to the tunnels was. Did he need to? Mav would definitely want to help, but Maren never got the impression from the stoic peacekeeper that he would compromise his plan for someone he'd just met.
So the best we can do right now is pray,
She said.
Whatever you feel's best. Not that praying to the Titans will help.
So Maren lay back as the woman began mumbling, despite her pounding skull and dizzied movements. Maren tried to think of a means to escape for her and all the other victims. Mav ground his knuckles into the sidewalk. After his explosive roar, he'd spend at least 10 minutes pacing back and forth. He'd failed again. Not been quick enough, good enough to help someone in need. Again. That on loop in his head, he practically worked himself into a frenzy. Then, training finally took over. He'd taken a deep breath, and then at least a dozen more to calm his rushing blood. He'd plopped on the ground and punched the sidewalk, knuckles unfeeling. Then a message from Coda appeared. Heart racing, Mav opened the message. Coordinates. Mav plugged the numbers in, and a point in the sewers beneath the Seco Research Building popped up. Finally! He knew where to go next. And if all pretenses were gone, then it was time for Mav to let loose.
Descend your blessings upon us, O Titans of all elements,
The woman partitioned, barely breathing.
May any of you or your chosen bless us with the miracle to save us.
A splitting headache Maren could deal with, but adding the woman's prayers to her grievances made scheming an escape next to impossible.
May the rulers of the ether discover our plight and aid us, or may a flame bearer light our way to safety, as they once did so long ago.
A distant blast sounded from deep within the tunnels, making the ground rumble. The prisoners jumped and the woman ceased praying. A sonorous, echoing voice shouted from far off. Even in her state of mind, the yelled word was simple enough to discern. Maren.
No way.
Maren breathed, beginning to smirk.
What dramatic timing.
Coda sat in a plush chair at the head of a long table. The room was clearly used for meetings, as it had a massive monitor behind him and more than a dozen chairs along the table. Floor-to-ceiling windows would provide a view of the city, had they not been darkened, letting only the emergency lights illuminate the room. Coda was used to the dark. It had hardly ever limited his vision, thanks to his gift. But with how much of it he'd used recently, he couldn't even afford to see his surroundings. So, he sat, meditating, then finally sent the coordinates to Mav. That should have given everyone enough time to do what they needed. And soon Mav would create chaos downstairs, leaving Coda free to take the documents he sought. The door opened, revealing the dark-skinned woman who had been arguing with the CEO before Coda entered. Coda had looked into her a few minutes ago. Natasha Davis, CFO of Seco Research. She appeared competent at her job, but nothing truly noteworthy had stood out. Her face, however, looked guilty, like a child who'd broken his father's favorite walking cane and knew he had to come forward, yet still feared the consequences. Not dealing with the issues downstairs? Coda asked.
Don't mock me,
the CFO said.
You've probably already guessed that David wants me nowhere near the situation.
So, what's with the look and visit? The CFO seemed to chew on something invisible, then scrunched her face. She let out a breath, relaxing her features.
Fine, she said. I'll tell you, but I should probably wait for a lawyer.
Coda folded his arms. Don't you already have Celine Hicks on speed dial? The CFO flushed. She represents the company. What I have to tell you goes against their interests. A rumble, low and deep, hummed. It didn't cause the paintings on the wall to shake, nor did it force the CFO to lose her balance. But it was evident enough for her to look at the floor.
Thanks, Mav.
You've got to be kidding me, she whispered.
Can't make any promises about how you'll fare from whatever you tell me, Coda said. But say it quick or come with me, because I have to move.
The blast hadn't been the largest Mav had ever created, but it did the job. Flames danced along Mav's shoulders, lighting both the sewer behind him and the tunnel before him. Rent and melting metal caved inwards, pressed against the walls that glowed a deep orange from the strike. Mav inhaled, filling his lungs. Maren! Her name echoed, yet no one responded. Right. If she was unconscious, that would have been a little difficult for her to do. Hopefully, knocking her out had been the worst thing that they'd done. He charged forwards, his cooled muscles from the strike stiffening him. He only grunted and pumped his legs faster, heedless of his destination. If someone attacked him, that meant he was going in the right direction. Thankfully, it only took 30 seconds before the 3 men with flamethrowers ran to block him. They blasted 3 jets of flame, which Mav let hit him for a moment. His freezing muscles loosened, the frost threatening to cover his skin, evaporating before it fully formed. Warmed up, Mav conjoined his flame with theirs, making the violent fire practically cool to the touch. It only took seconds for Mav to kick one of the men in the sternum, grab the other 2 by the back of their heads, and slam their foreheads into each other. "Where have you taken those people?" Mav yelled as they fell to the floor. The only answer came from the man that he'd kicked, clutching his sternum and failing to grasp for air. Right, ask questions first, then incapacitate them. He pressed on. Soon, he hit an intersection where voices came from the right. 2 more men neared him, dim lights flickering from behind them. "Where have you taken those people?" Mav yelled. Then he jumped through their flames, kicking one's temple into the wall and bashing the other's face into the floor. They didn't respond. New idea. Ask questions first, allow them to answer, then incapacitate them. Bangs and roars echoed from down the hallway. A dim light barely lit an enforced metal door at the end of the corridor. The sounds came from the other side. Looked like it was time to force another opening.
I was completely against all of this, the CFO said in a huff, trying to keep up with Coda's speed walk. Along with several others, but we were outvoted. They wanted to provide services that no other companies could, but their ideas required that they do some deplorable things to people, and sorry, I can't even bear to say it, all for experimentation.
I figured, Coda said.
So David contacted some friends in high places. I don't know them all. He wouldn't tell me. Then all these people started getting kidnapped and weird things came from our R&D department. The CFO was probably relieved that all the hallways were empty, even the one outside of the CEO's office. Everyone probably figured dealing with the mess downstairs was more important than making sure no one snooped around the upper floors of the building, especially since the door was locked. I wanted to go to the police, the CFO continued, or the government, or someone, but
everyone's busy with the festival, Coda said.
And one of David's associates hired Miss Hicks to make sure everyone stayed busy until after the feast.
What were the plans for tomorrow when the government claimed they would investigate the missing persons in earnest?
No idea. I started fighting David at every turn. I wanted him to stop, but he wouldn't. What we've been doing to those people, creating those things from them, it's just too much.
From them? Those monsters aren't deformed people?
The CFO shook her head. But the process that made those things were painful. Her eyes grew distant, her lips quivering. The screams.
You'll be expected to repeat all this in court, Coda said. And more. But first, we need to get into David's office and then into his personal files for evidence. Without proof linking directly to him, this won't hold in court.
Then we have to hurry. Those files are large and will take time to download, but they're not only in that computer. He has a personal device that he can access them from. If he's afraid that we're taking his files, he'll delete them before we collect the data.
Then we move quick. But first, they had to make it through that locked door. The light went in and out like a heartbeat, providing only still shots of movement.
The civilians caged with Maren quivered as shouts and growls sounded from outside the glass. A wet body slapped against their cell. The brief illumination displayed a squished, bulbous body of a monster. A woman shrieked. A child cried. From outside their cell, a man roared and more fire erupted. Before it consumed the monster, however, 2 more beasts struck the man from behind. He turned, trying to engulf them in the flames, but it was too late. The 2 monsters merged their bodies together and enveloped the man. The one against the glass removed itself, seeming to teleport each time the lights flashed on, conjoined with the others, settling over the man. He screamed. Not one from an ache or a simple wound, but deep, unrelenting agony. Like from pain, Maren imagined one would feel being dipped in boiling oil, or having their skull crushed slowly in a vice. One of the civilians heaved, but nothing came from her stomach. Even Maren quivered as the conglomerate undulated over the man. Then the noise cut off, strangled, until there was nothing but silence. The thing stood, now as one, much greater in size than the 3 of them combined should have been. Nothing but clothing and weapons remained of the man. It turned towards the glass. People cowered against the far wall as the light cut off. When it came back, the thing's amorphous arm was in the air, as if it was preparing to strike. A bang blasted as the lights cut off, shaking the cell. Maren's arms trembled as she tried to push herself to her feet. The lights returned just as the creature punched the glass again. Several cracks formed at the strike. I have to protect them. Maren stumbled to the side, but held herself aloft, even after another bash shook the floor. Until Mav gets here, I have to keep them safe. The cracks spread to the edges of the glass door. Maren stood between the monster and the fearful civilians. Just push past it. The light turned on. The monster's arm was wound back. Maren's mouth, throat, and skin dried beyond what she even thought was possible as water gathered before her. Another smash destroyed the glass, the shattered pieces hitting the water shield. The shards lost their momentum, falling to the floor without cutting anyone behind her. Then, before the light could turn back on, a burst of orange fire propelled a door down the hallway and slammed into the creature. It lurched to the side, blown away. A manic young man with broad shoulders and a tight bun rushed forward, flames swirling in his left hand. He noticed the broken glass in the prison cell, swiftly turning on his heel and pulling his flaming hand back, ready to throw. But he stopped, eyes wide as Maren's legs buckled. A powerful arm wrapped around her back, pulling her into Mav's firm uniform and holding her up. Her cheek rested against his shoulder, her eyes too weary to remain open. It's all right, Mav said, his voice calm, his flame warming the cold room. You're safe with me now.
Can't you open it with your gift?
The CFO said. Why should I waste my time with it when you already have access? Coda asked. It was a gamble, but it worked. The CFO huffed but pulled out a keycard.
I don't normally have authority to get in there without David's permission, she said, holding the keycard against the small screen to the right at the CEO's door. But he gave all of us full access due to this time of crisis.
Guess he didn't expect anyone to turn on him.
Guess not.
The door opened.
Thankfully, he still trusts me enough not to have changed the code.
Thankfully. The computer on the CEO's desk was locked. But again, the CFO got into it easily. He gave you all access to his personal files on his own computer? The CFO turned away bashful.
Actually, I got access from something else.
Her tone suggested a more personal endeavor had been undergone to acquire that information. Coda supplied no further inquiries nor judgments. He was correct, and he'd experienced the same style of intimate espionage as she had. Likely a lot more than her too. The files were numerous. Most simple clutter regarding new patents, existing mundane projects, and bare sketches of ideas. The CFO supplied specific passwords when they reached a particularly private section. Coda eyed her as she typed on the keyboard. She was entirely focused on her task, not paying attention to Coda, which meant he didn't have to hide his suspicion of her.
There,
she said. There were fewer files there, mostly of top secret documents and plans, but Coda only had eyes for 2 damning pieces of data. The first dealt with the experiments and the kidnappings. Coda scanned the document for details. In moments, he understood how Secco Research was trying to take a Titan's powers and implant them into several people with the aim of making more wielders. The technology to do so would have profited the company enough to single-handedly boost them to the big leagues. All experiments, however, have been massive failures. The power injected into people had been thrown up, usually after the subject experienced an excruciating pain. Instead of disposing the puke immediately, they kept it in large vats to study it. Eventually, the vomit coalesced and then formed humanoid figures with tails. Secco finally, as of this morning, decided to dispose of them in the dump site. But there had been an issue during the transportation, causing an outbreak both at the site and in the basements, where the R&D department was located. All this was dated to barely over a week ago, at the time when the kidnappings began. Why hadn't this file been made earlier in preparation for experiments?
Guarding lands, the CFO breathed. Those awful experiments are one thing, but that!
She pointed at the second file Coda pulled up. These were funds, transfers more or less, money laundering, but not to employee accounts or even private ones in different provinces. All funds went to many legitimate appearing organizations, but Coda knew all the hidden language. David Fujita, CEO of Secco Research, was helping fund an anti-government terrorist organization, simply known as RISE. They had bases of operation all over town, which the document also helped locate due to the funds transfer. No other codes. Coda had scrolled through to the next. Nothing hiding the locations. Coda glanced at the CFO, who was covering her mouth in shock.
Shit,
she whispered, pointing to a red circle in the bottom right corner of the screen.
He knows someone's in the files?
Where was he when he left me in that room? Coda asked.
The viewing platform, several stories above the experimentation room.
Coda welcomed the black, but only briefly. The darkness scurried towards him, threatening to keep him from reality. The CEO, outlined in white in Coda's vision, was not in a platform, but the lobby instead, heading towards a large elevator on the north side of the atrium. He's coming up from the south elevator, Coda said. Stall him while I download this data. Try to prevent him from deleting it all on his end. The CFO nodded, then left without a word. Hopefully, he gets here without running into her. Coda connected his screen to the CEO's computer and started downloading the first file. I'd like to have a little chat with him alone. 23 people shrunk away from Mav's flame. They looked haggard, pale, sunken cheeks clung to their bones, their eyes gaunt and lifeless like a fish on ice, and the greasy hair plastered to the sides of their heads. And Maren, folded against his body, legs trembling despite him steadying her, looked even worse. "Water?" Maren croaked. The door Mav had blasted away flung upwards and slammed into the ceiling. The creature it had hit was on its feet, making a wet guttural howl as its tail flailed into the wall and tables. Mav could barely see because of the lighting. "Stay here," Mav said, gently laying Maren on the floor. He turned to the crowd. "Watch over her." The monstrosity bounded towards Mav, front limbs extending. "Fire blast!" Mav roared. The explosion struck the creature's face. Most of its body flew backwards, but its reaching limbs dislodged from its body and sailed behind Mav. The attack had singed the monster's outer layer, but the skin beneath the blackened crisps undulated. In moments, the burnt sections restored themselves. "Gotta go hotter." Mav took a breath, a chill creeping through his bones. The fire that danced along his back grew brighter, hotter, lighting the room. Dozens of toppled hospital-style beds surrounded a long table covered with beakers, glasses, and vials. A sink dipped at its center. The creature's tail hit the top of the table, shattering glass, and pulled itself to its feet. "Fire stream!" Mav lunged forward, thrusting his arms towards the monster. The brilliant flames slammed into the monster's upper torso. It wailed, stepping back, but kept its footing. Flames spread over its body, engulfing it entirely. But it didn't grow smaller. "Searing fire stream!" Mav yelled, his muscles growing colder as the heat intensified. The monster backed into a wall. Its tail lashed out, but only slammed into a toppled bed. Something slammed into his right calf. He lost his footing, sliding forward as a squishy substance enveloped his legs. An arm which had flown away had gripped him from behind and was dragging him towards the main body. The second arm was only a few feet away. "Flash fire foot explosion!"
Mav's foot burst into flames, blasting apart the creeping limb. Double stream! He held his arms to either side, his flames over both the thing's body and its wriggling arm. His foot explosion had definitely damaged the arm, and the fire stream slowly withered it away. The larger body, however, began to walk forward, pushing against the flames. Just get hotter! Maren didn't even croak her intention. Mav's fire illuminated the room. There was a sink in its center. If water was still flowing, Maren could help Mav. So she crawled forward, heedless of the broken glass beneath her arms. Hold on, young lady, the middle-aged woman who'd spoken to her before said, gripping her shoulder and impeding her progress. You're in no position to fight. Gotta help. But the peacekeeper... Maren grunted, then nodded towards the monster's arms, crawling towards him as he pushed the monster into the wall with his fire. Water. Maren gestured to the sink. Help. The woman chewed her lip, then grabbed Maren's wrist. I'm going to need your help. I can't lift you on my own. Here, a man said, stepping forward. The two raised Maren's arms over their shoulders, half carrying, half dragging her bravely into the heart of the fiery fray. Flames had nearly consumed the first arm. The body, however, was now in striking distance, and to make matters worse, the second arm turned away and crawled towards the sink in the center of the room, where Maren and two civilians stood. A woman filled a glass with water, while a man held Maren on her feet, seemingly unaware of the encroaching limb. The body's tail lashed out, slamming into Mav's side. It wrapped around his upper torso, then heaved him toward the far wall, just as the hand reached the civilians.
Maren took long, controlled sips of water. Despite every fiber of her being pleading for her to chug, she controlled herself. She wouldn't be much use in a fight if she cramped up or choked all the water she drank out of her. But this one glass wasn't nearly enough to make her useful in a fight either. She needed much, much more. Mav roared as the monster's tail dragged him away. Defend! The tail, with Mav inside it, slammed into the wall. A deep orange glow emanated from within the tail, and hissing sounded as smoke rose to the ceiling. The weak! An explosion ruptured the tail and sent Mav hurtling to a spot behind Maren. The middle-aged woman gasped as Mav's body slammed into. Was that the monster's arm? Maren hadn't noticed it creeping up on them. A second later, that arm the size of a tree trunk would have snagged the woman. Then, those man's screams echoed in her head. She ditched the glass and held her mouth beneath the faucet's stream. The time for self-care was over. Flashfire bear hug! Mav roared. He squeezed the arm, clenching it close to him as he rolled from the civilians. The goopy exterior clung to his face, a rancid odor diving into his nostrils. His skin tingled where it touched him, then turned painful. The flames exploded from Mav's core and inner arms, blasting the bulbous arm to pieces. Flame puddle! Mav slapped the ground, a ripple of fire extending across the floor. It didn't reach the civilians at the center table, but it spread over the chunks of monstrous arm, igniting them. Mav charged ahead before he could make sure they burned entirely. The monster, with barely a char along its massive body, lumbered towards Maren, drinking from the faucet, and the two cowering civilians. Hey! Mav yelled. Pick on someone your own size. The monster, a solid 2 feet taller than him, growled. Mav returned one of his own, expelling flames from the corners of his mouth for effect. Before Mav could attack again, something boomed from the adjacent room. The ground rumbled, and he and the monster nearly lost their footing. The room trembled again. Then a door burst open. 5 men fled towards the monster Mav was fighting. A 6th man appeared from the room, but something snapped from the dark room and latched onto the man's legs. He hit the ground and then screamed and clawed at the floor as goopy tendrils dragged him into the darkness. All the while, the monster turned away from Mav. It marched towards the dark room. Don't ignore me, asshole! Mav hit the monster's back with a fire blast, but it didn't even turn to regard him. Down! Maren yelled from behind. Without thought, Mav hit the ground. A thick spout of water sliced through the air. It slid along the monster's back horizontally, slicing through half of its upper torso. Curse it! Maren said. 5 smaller but louder spurts appeared, cutting through the monster's body. Another 10 pressurized streams flew from the floor to the ceiling, dicing the monster into much smaller pieces. Now! Maren screamed. Fire floor spread! Mav slapped the ground again, his flames reaching forward over the ground. The chunks of monster, wriggling about and oozing dark tendrils, ignited. Intensify! The flames increased. Within a few seconds, the monster parts were gone.
You forgot to yell an attack name before,
Maren said once the fire vanished. What do you mean? Mav asked, standing up. Maren smirked, her eyes lively and skin renourished.
Before I told you to get down.
What are you talking about? Mav scratched the back of his head. The "don't ignore me, asshole" move is one of my most popular ones. Something crashed in the adjacent room with enough force to make Mav and Maren shake. Sounds like there's a lot more of them, Mav said.
Or a few huge ones, Maren said.
I'll deal with them.
Not alone. It's easier for you to burn them when they're in pieces, which I can make.
We can't leave them alone. The wounded victims were mostly still in their cell. Thankfully, they were on the opposite end of the room where the tremors came from, and even better, they were close to the exit. Maren blessedly understood.
I'll get them out of here, but then I'm coming back.
Don't leave all the fun to me, Maren smirked.
Wouldn't dream of it.
Before Maren could do or say anything else, Mav rushed into the dark room. Another tremor shook the floor and an orange light shone from the darkness.
He's really what a peacekeeper should be.
Too bad those kinds never lasted in the Corps.
We need to go.
Maren took another sip of water. She was feeling much better, but she still felt drained. That last attack had been too small for her to feel this parched again.
Find everyone who can walk on their own. They'll help everyone who can't. I'll secure the exit.
The middle-aged woman and the man ran to the cell. Maren peered into the hallway that led out of there. With Mav and his fire gone, it was dark, except for when the lights flickered on. The door he destroyed revealed an opening. But after that...
Oh no.
Maren ran into the hallway, which was blocked only 10 feet after the opening. Maren found a screen along the wall, lit by a dim red light. The panel that controlled these tunnels' security defenses. In many tunnels like these, companies invested in extra secure doorways that blocked paths in the case of emergency. It seemed like those men who'd run past here had activated it before escaping to safety. Now Maren and those 23 civilians were trapped. The world shook as Mav charged into the dark room. He bumped into something gooey, which overlay a large and metallic object. The darkness obscured everything, but darkness always fled from Mav. Guiding light! Flames shot from his shoulders into the air. They were meant to rest on the ceiling, to brighten the room, but they spread as more tendrils caught flame. Mav's heart pumped, his hair beginning to rise. The room only had two features in its center. A permanent table or operating bed that Mav had bumped into, and some horizontal pod. To the right, a long cabinet ran along the room's length, with shelves overhanging it. To the left, a gaping hole led to a completely different room. From the hole, hundreds of dark tendrils snaked across the floor, wall, and ceiling, burying everything beneath it. Lumps on the floor likely represented rubble from the destroyed wall, though one in the far corner moaned in pain. Mav's heart pumped out, his hair on end. Cleaning fire! Like candlelight to spider's silk, the controlled fire vanquished the cursed roots in a wave. Something massive churned through the opening in the wall, but the pod before Mav drew his attention. A warm, dull glow emanated from a glass section. As Mav walked closer, he treaded upon wires and tubes connecting the pod to the metal table. What was inside seemed to remove all the cold that had built up in Mav's body. Wait! A man, the one beneath the tendrils, croaked, feebly reaching to Mav as he gripped the pod's door. You'll ruin everything. Mav's fingers melted the pod's hinges, then he wrenched the door aside. You fool! The man said, beginning to crawl forward. Hey, little one, Mav said, voice calm and soothing. He reached into the pod. There you go. You're safe now. He pulled out the baby Titan. Leave it, the man said. But Mav only had eyes for the Titan. It was a four-legged land type. By its dark and light brown coloration with a striped tail, its body was similar to that of a small feral cat, but its head was different. The back of its skull extended outwards, creating a small frill. The creature should have been beautiful. It shouldn't have had rods skewered into each of its legs, through its tails, at the nape of its neck, and at the small of its back. Its fur should have been luxurious, not matted in patches across its skin, which definitely should not have clung to every bone in its body. It shouldn't have half its teeth missing, nor should its calls be weak, pathetic mules. And its eyes should have been wide with wonder, curiosity, and delight. It should have found a child it would connect and then interlink itself with. It should have experienced the world through their eyes, gifting them with miraculous skills, which they themselves should use to serve and protect others. But its wide eyes were filled with fear, pain, and confusion. Its heavy breathing pushed its tiny chest against Mav's sturdy one as he cradled the poor creature. Someone called his name from behind him. The man continued crawling toward him. Tremors shook from the other side of the wall's hole, but none of that mattered to Mav. "It's fine." Mav gently stroked its sunken cheek with a finger. "There's no need to fear anymore. I'm here to save you." The Titan's breath slowed. Mav smiled. It blinked and its pupils grew smaller. "That's right. Nothing's gonna hurt you." It blinked again, its eyelids unable to rise all the way. Then again and again. Each time its eyes opened less and less. Its breathing returned to a natural rhythm, and then a lethargic one. "You're safe." Mav smiled at it, petting its cheek. "You're safe." It closed its eyes. The room had stopped shaking, yet the tiniest rumble remained from within the Titan, almost a purr. Then the little body stilled, matching the surrounding world. The Titan's body disappeared into light, wafting over Mav's face until it vanished into the ether, leaving behind only a warm sensation on his cheeks, clattering equipment on the floor, and teardrops on Mav's forearms where the little miracle left this world. Maren had to make a list. There was simply too much going on. If she focused on the wrong details, they wouldn't leave this secret laboratory alive. 1. The civilians were back in the cell. Those able to stand were guarding those who couldn't, armed with nothing but a few shattered pieces of glass. 2. That tiny Titan Seco Research hadn't only experimented on humans, they drained a baby Titan of power to do it. Pain from an uncomfortable memory at this familiar scene needed to be shoved aside, just like the desire to exact retribution on the evil bastards who caused the poor thing to suffer so much for God knew how long. That was because... 3. The creature in the other room. It was hunched over, facing away from the hole in the wall, its gargantuan arms waving from side to side as its limbs undulated. That had to be their top priority. Mav, however, was clearly too focused on what was in front of him. Before Maren could blink, Mav had grabbed the man, a scientist helpfully displaying his profession by wearing a lab coat, by the front of his shirt and pinned him to the shelf along the far wall, a brilliant inferno in his left palm. "Mav!" Maren shouted, starting forward. The arms of the demon in the other room stopped, gesticulating. "Mav, hold on." "Give me a reason," Mav hissed, face inches from the scientist's ear. "One reason why I shouldn't make you feel the same pain you gave that little one."
"Mav!"
Maren said, but had to stop a few feet from him. The heat was so intense. "Necessary evil," the man rasped, trying to inch away from the flame. "All the lives we will save with this." "Don't bullshit me," Mav roared. "Like you care about." The room trembled again. The monster had finally noticed them.
"Mav!" Maren yelled. "Let him go!"
Mav noticed her, his eyes widening. "What are you doing here so fast?"
"We're blocked in. Let him go. If you want to save those people, we need to deal with that."
She pointed to the hole, where the largest monstrous experiment yet glared at them. It moved toward the hole. Mav released the true monster, dashed to the hole, and rocketed toward it in a literal flash. Maren whipped the scientist in the face with water.
"We'll deal with you later."
Now she had to keep Mav alive, or they were all done for. The 20-foot behemoth hadn't caused the baby Titan so much suffering, but punching it in the face with a fistful of explosive fire felt good. The thing roared, stumbling back from Mav's strike. Its face was indented and partially blown away along with its right side, the slimy skin blackened by the fire. The skin undulated, repairing itself and reforming into its normal monstrous face as Mav hit the ground at a roll. The room was massive, at least 3 times the size of the room with the hospital beds. It was also at least 3 stories tall, with the room Mav jumped from along its second story. Various platforms had led from one floor to the next, but most were in ruins, smashed and lying on the floor. Not like it wasn't already cluttered. Shattered glass from broken pods, tipped over vats in varying degrees of disrepair, and dozens of articles of clothing and destroyed flamethrowers all made it difficult to take a single step without stepping on debris. The monster couldn't seem to care less. It stomped forward, smashing another pod and vat with a leg the width of a car.
Trails of fire!
Mav swept his hand along the floor towards the monster. Flames sailed beneath the monster's leg. It groaned, stepping away as its skin sizzled. Mav repeated the action, aiming at various points in the room until paths of flame filled the area. So long as Mav concentrated to keep the fire alive, there wasn't a spot on the floor the beast could step without getting burned. Then the beast struck Mav with its tail as he placed the final trail, sending him flying. A broken pod stopped his flight, a loud clang sounding as his body dented the device. Back aching, Mav focused on keeping the flames alive. The monster, however, didn't seem to care much about the fire. It stepped on the trails and then removed its limbs, which completely healed by the time it touched down again.
Flame stream!
Fire roared from his palms, searing the monster's chest. It placed an arm before it, hiding from the flames behind its hand, and continued walking.
I might be in trouble,
Mav muttered.
Come on!
Maren jammed her finger on the tablet screen.
Load, curse it!
The demon looked even worse in Mav's firelight. His fire alone couldn't handle it, and she wasn't powerful enough to cut something so massive into pieces. She needed a lot more water to use and a different plan from her normal slicing and dicing. But for it to work, she needed a water source, preferably one that flowed near this room. In order to know where the closest one was, however, her cursed tablet needed to load. The beast punched at Mav, the ground rumbling. The Peacekeeper dodged, running to the side while sending a rocket of flame to the monster. Maren's heart pounded. Didn't matter how strong Mav was, a few hits from that and he'd be dead. The Mav finally loaded.
Thank God,
Maren whispered, not caring if someone heard. She zoomed in on their position. The nearest pipe that brought water to the labs as well as the building proper was along the highest level of an adjacent wall. That meant it was approximately 10 feet above her and along the wall on her left. Most of the platforms used for moving supplies to other rooms were completely destroyed. Only one small section near the corner of the upper left wall was still intact. She had her plan. The only problem was there were no ladders leading to that platform, nor were there hanging beams of metal to climb.
Mav!
Maren yelled.
Mav!
The Peacekeeper was sending dozens of smaller fireballs at the monster, each erupting upon contact.
What's up?
I need to get up there.
Mav glanced at her to see where she pointed.
I got you.
Roaring another attack name, Mav thrusted both arms at the monster. A concussive blast shoved it aside. In seconds, an explosion at Mav's feet vaulted him to Maren. Without a word, he grabbed the backs of her legs and shoulders and carried her like a baby.
Cover your ears,
Mav said. She didn't hesitate to listen. A roaring eruption shook beneath them as Mav leapt into the massive room. They peaked too soon, however, and began to dip at least 5 feet from the platform. Mav readjusted her in his grip, and then suddenly Maren found herself soaring alone, given new height by Mav's shove. She tucked her legs in and landed on the platform, slowing down to only bump into the wall.
Mav!
Maren yelled. Mav had bounded off the wall he'd collided into, and was already running toward the monster.
I need you up here too!
Should have said that earlier!
Mav yelled back, leaping forward to avoid another punch from the beast. The monster lumbered around to face Mav, who'd skirted too close to the opposite wall. Now Maren couldn't see him due to the monster blocking her vision. It punched downward, rattling the room. A small blast brought Mav atop the monster's head. It stood straight and Mav used its own momentum and another blast to sail him across the room. A little too well, though. He was hurtling at an extreme rate. Hitting the wall at that speed would undoubtedly knock him out. Best case scenario. A couple tiny blasts in front of him, however, seemed to slow him down enough to hit the wall at a relatively low speed. When he fell to the platform, however, the metal groaned.
Easy there,
Maren said, steadying Mav.
Don't need you falling and trying that again.
Bet it looks badass, though, Mav said. Maren held in a smirk. He wasn't wrong. Not that the monster who turned to face them cared.
Can you destroy the wall and some pipes behind it?
Maren asked. An intense heat lit his left fist.
Where do I punch?
Mav's body was slowing. The cold continually encroached his muscles and skin. He'd used so much fire already, but he couldn't stop now, even if punching a wall seemed pointless. The giant monster was beginning to lumber toward them. But Maren must have had her reasons. So, with the same force that demolished the sewer wall which led him here, Mav blasted where Maren directed. He shielded her with his body, his own fire harmlessly sliding away from him. What followed nearly sent Mav and Maren tumbling onto the burning landscape. The platform lilted, dipping with a groan of metal until it stopped at an uncomfortable downward angle. Maren gripped Mav's arm for support, dragging him back slightly. If Maren hadn't done that, though, Mav would have been struck in the face by a torrent of water that spewed from that wall. Instead, it sailed overhead, arcing onto the fiery floor.
Cool it,
Maren shouted, leaning into the incline.
that thing can recover from fire, but I can't.
But I got the pipe open, Mav said, helping her find her footing to the right of the flowing water.
Maren grumbled, then said, I'm going to hold the water back and then send a highly powerful pressurized blast through the beast. When I yell, I want you to hit my water with the hottest fire you can make. That should blow that thing apart, and then...
Mav leaped from the platform. The monster was beginning to reach up for them.
Flames scattershot!
A dozen tiny fireballs lit the monster's face. It faltered as Mav landed on it. Its skin tried to cling to his suit, but he ignited a small flame along his body, which allowed him to slide down the creature's back.
Rupturing flame.
As Mav neared the base of the tail, he slammed 2 fists into it. The explosion removed half of the tail from its back and flung Mav into the air. He twisted until he faced the monster. Then he lost his footing as he landed on a semi-destroyed vat. The monster loomed over him. From between its legs, Mav noticed the water no longer fell on the floor. Maren should have enough pressure built up any second now. Time for him to start.
Mav!
Maren roared from above.
Now!
Shit! Mav's muscles locked up, an incredible chill escaping from his lungs as flames encased his body. He compressed them into a ball in his hands.
Flash fire!
The water blast had already sailed through the beast's chest. Mav's heart leaped into his throat. He flung his arm skyward, hurling a fireball to the water at his chest. The air sizzled as the world became an intense smoky white. Metal careened across the floor, away from the sudden steam explosion. The pressure flung Mav backward until he eventually rolled to a stop, lying sideways. He felt cold, like lying naked in the snow. But he could do one more attack. One large blast to burn all the remaining pieces and survive. That is, if the plan had worked. But as the steam settled, the imposing figure of that massive monster, though damaged, remained.
Shit,
Maren breathed. The attack hadn't been worthless. The entire front half of the demon had been blown aside, but not apart. The skin obstinately clung together, splayed out and around like a hollow half dome of clay. A 3-foot wide hole remained where Maren had sent the geyser. Not even seconds after the steam lessened, the monster's skin began to shrink back into itself, mending the wounds. All the while, Mav struggled to rise. His movements were jerky, lethargic. He stopped completely when he got to his knees.
He's used too much fire.
Maren's heart gave a painful thud.
He could freeze at any moment.
She wasn't much better. Just holding and directing that much water nearly dehydrated her again. Another try and...
Just push past it. Curse you.
Though she smiled at the thought. Her body dried. She held the water back.
I can do one more.
Then follow my lead.
Frost expelled from Mav's roar. The demon's skin began to morph into its anthropomorphic body. Red fire blasted over Mav, then it condensed into his hands. The demon's tail began to protrude. Another blast of flame, then it condensed into the ball, glowing orange. Mav planted one foot on the ground. The demon's face solidified. Another blast, and then it condensed. The orange glowed brighter. Mav stood hunched over the flame. All that was left of the demon to cure was the hole in his chest, which began to shrink. Another blast, another condensing. The flame, warping the surrounding air, beginning to melt nearby metal, glowed white. With each struggled step he took, each pained breath he made, Mav's eyes only for the blazing light in his palms. Still, Another image of hands holding fire interrupted his vision. I won't waste the life you gave me. Mav forced his gaze at the beast, taking its first step towards him, the hole in his chest growing smaller. I'll protect them all. Transferring the flame to one hand, he charged forwards. Now! Maren had to squint as she watched Mav. The little star in his hand expelled the room's darkness, its constant roar like a jet drowning out the sound of the small blast beneath Mav's feet that propelled him to the demon's chest and even Maren's hammering heart. It drowned out everything, except Mav's call. Maren took in a breath, aimed, then shot the rush of water to the hole in the monster's back, which was only about a foot wide now. The monster moved its arms, as if trying to embrace Mav. He neared the monster's closing gap, and thrusted his hand forward. He saw nothing else due to the fire's white light, but he didn't need to. Maren's water would arrive before the monster's skin swallowed him, and then Mav's light vanished within the monster for but a moment. Then the geyser struck through the demon's skin. Vaporized water blasted the demon apart. Large and small chunks splattered away against the wall as searing steam shoved Maren. The platform she stood upon groaned, then gave way. She fell for a moment, her stomach lurching, but gripped the bottom of the shattered wall. An ominous orange glow from the floor illuminated the thick steam. Run! Mav yelled, the orange shining brighter. Right. He still had to burn all the pieces. Don't die, Maren called. Either he didn't respond or she didn't hear it. She leaped, her skin drying as she controlled the water from the pipe around her, and guided herself into the room where the baby titan had died. It was slightly more visible there, though still marred by the steam. She wrapped the unconscious scientist in water and charged into the room with the beds. What's going? A man said, holding some supplies between a counter on the wall and the cell. Hide! Maren commanded, throwing the scientist into the room and closing the door. Get into the cell now! Frost shattered as Mav got to his feet. The upper left portion of his suit was completely destroyed. Looked like he'd lost control in that attack. And time to lose it again. Pieces of the disgusting monster wobbled, little gooey tendrils attempting to link pieces together. If he didn't move now, then the monster would grow again. I defend. Even at the cost of his life, he would bear the flame to those in need. The weak. Mav focused on the fire, still lining the floor. Its heat grew, and strangely, so did Mav's temperature. The chill was gone, replaced instead by a calm, comfortable warmth. Mav commanded Maren to run. This might be his last spark, but it shouldn't be hers. He couldn't wait, however. The nearby pieces were already closing in on each other. Titans only knew about the ones which were farther away. Mav took a breath, an intense heat sizzling everywhere. Inferno! He spread his arms, gathering his last bits of his strength. Images crowded his memory. The woman at the station walking her cat, the receptionist at the building where they watched the video feed, Evan and his father in the park, Michael at Sacred Skies, those 23 emaciated victims in their cells upstairs, and Maren, hopefully in a safer place now. Had she said something before she left? Had she commanded him not to die? He'd said the same thing to Thomas, and with a roar, screaming with every bit of breath in his lungs, as it scraped from his throat. All his emotions born in fires of which the flame titan above would be proud, fueled by the wrath of his past failures, and by greed to never fail one who depended on him again. He cried, Hellscape!
Maren had heard of earthquakes and war zones where bombs littered the battleground with craters. She'd never experienced either before. She imagined, however, that this was what it felt like to be in the middle of both. The world shook so violently that the previous tremors felt like shivers. A torrent of flames blasted the door to the smaller room open. The temperature spiked, the heat unbalancing Maren. The civilians huddled together, screaming, though Maren heard none of it. A cacophony of rushing flames blared in her ear, forcing her to cover them. Even that brought little relief. Hell now existed in two places, one in the afterlife, the other in the middle of that inferno. Coda had grown used to the slight rumblings and subsequent panicked looks on workers who rushed by as he walked away from the CEO's office. The most recent one, however, was far more violent. It threw people into the wall and floor. Even Coda, walking along several large windows, tripped into one. The street and sidewalk far below cracked, bits dripping beneath the surface as smoke plumed into the air. Then, the chaos simply stopped. Mav. Coda rushed to the nearest stairwell. It was more pounding than a ringing, but it remained in Maren's ear even after the flames died down. She walked forward with careful steps. It was no longer necessary to enter the side room to view the fight, or what was left of it. The far corner of the room with hospital beds was destroyed, giving way to the massive area where they'd fought the demon. But the abomination was gone, no trace remaining. Now all that lingered in that room were pools of molten metal, and a frozen figure. The top left of the uniform destroyed to reveal his arm, shoulder, and pec, standing resolute in the center. Chest jutted, arms out, and chin held high.
Praise be to the flame bearer,
The middle-aged woman standing beside Maren said.
he who brings warm light to us in the cold darkness.
A murmur of praise rippled across the tortured civilians who'd followed her. They fell to their knees, their voices growing louder. Maren didn't have the heart to be angry about it. At the cost of his life, he protected all of them, and likely thousands more in the city. At this moment, he deserved the... A frosted breath expelled from Mav's mouth. Like a punch in the gut, Maren lost her breath. He couldn't be still alive. That breath had to have been a figment of her imagination. Or maybe it was his final one.
But if it isn't...
Maren searched the room, head whipping left and right. A civilian had been carrying supplies recently, which meant... There! 20 feet behind, her red nylon bag lay toppled over. She rushed to grab it, then charged and leaped from the broken floor. To hell with her dried-out skin and pounding head. Water flowed from her skin, surrounded her, and then dropped off near Mav. Another breath, smaller than the last, puffed from his lips. She yanked out a fire starter, placing the artificial wood in front of him. She had to be fast, but careful. If the wood caught fire from the heated metal, it wouldn't warm Mav. She lit a flame inches from his feet, and then draped her warm blanket around him. Not good enough. Maren stepped behind Mav and slid her hands beneath the blanket, wrapping her arms under his armpits and around his chest. So cold.
Don't die,
Maren whispered.
There are too few good men in this world already. I don't want to lose another one.
Still not enough. Mav let out a small breath, head fuzzy by the warmth. That still wouldn't have been enough to defeat that frozen evil wall titan. But he supposed it didn't matter now. It had been strong enough to deal with this problem. Hopefully all the kidnapped victims were safe. And Maren. Maybe Coda would look out for her. They'd get into legal trouble over this, wouldn't they? Suppose that was the one good thing about dying. He wouldn't have to deal with the consequences of his actions. Then, oddly, the warmth faded. Mav grumbled. Why were his limbs growing cold? Wasn't he supposed to become one with the great flame titans and experience eternal warmth? No, he wasn't cold. He was freezing. Mav opened his eyes. A small fire flickered before him. Not held in frigid palms, however, but in a makeshift campfire at his feet. A thick red blanket wrapped his upper torso. A slender, shivering body held him from behind, both propping him up and warming his chest. She was mumbling something again.
So don't die, hear me?
She ordered. Looked like he wouldn't join Thomas just yet. Yes, ma'am. Despite the hours that had passed, Maren was still thirsty. She sat hunched over on a hospital bench, sipping what was probably her 100th glass of water. Hours of waiting, talking, waiting, interrogations, waiting, interviews, waiting, and more waiting really made a girl parched. That and nearly killing herself twice over with her gift. Though honestly, she hadn't been as close to death as Mav had been. He'd more or less stabilized by the time Coda had found them. Then he was in safe hands, after the ambulances arrived. Now she waited outside of his room, where he lay in a warming bed. He'd likely spend the night there and be free to move about tomorrow. All 23 kidnapped people were safe, recuperating from the ordeal in the hospital. Their relieved families either in the rooms or talking to one another in the halls. The only deaths from this endeavor were those men working for Psycho Research who were involved in the experiments or those trying to contain them. Quite frankly, the end result was a miracle. One hell of a first mission. It was Coda, appearing as if from nowhere. He didn't sit by her on the bench, instead adopting his normal arms crossed pose while standing several feet away. Maren smirked.
I wouldn't mind if the next few are a little less insane.
Probably was thrilling down there, even with all those lives at stake. That your first life or death situation?
Not exactly.
Coda eyed her, then resumed staring at the door. At least you're off to a good record for your nameless guild.
One successful case and one dropped case isn't exactly a good start.
Entering Psycho Research through the sewers had been one of her last resort plans, but she needed to think of all the possibilities. While the boys left her for those couple hours, she talked to some Linux citizens, sometimes in areas with public cameras, but far enough away so they wouldn't pick up her voice. She documented a fake request that would bring her into the sewers. As she was the leader of an interim guild, documentation policies were lax. Requests for her weren't officially documented with the government, but personally documented for tax reporting. That meant her documents could be a little less detailed. Who needed inane details like the name and contact information of a client when the government only cared about how much credit it could take from her? Unfortunately for Maren, because that case never existed, she had to file it as dropped in her official records.
Not to mention, I can't even take credit for my real successful mission, Maren said.
The dropped case was a clever, if somewhat flimsy, excuse, Coda said. Were the justice system fair, it wouldn't hold up.
Were the justice system fair, we wouldn't have needed to circumvent all these detours.
Point taken.
So what now?
It's a mess out there. Everyone is trying to spin it as a win for themselves. The police, the governor's peacekeepers, the Ardent sect, and even Sekko's CFO. Maren's stomach churned. Coda had informed her a little of what he discovered earlier in the CEO's office. The monsters she'd been fighting all day had been magically anthropomorphized puke. No wonder she'd wanted to hurl upon first seeing and smelling them.
What's gonna happen to her?
Maren asked, trying to get her mind off vomit. Natasha will take a plea bargain, rat out everyone involved. We only gathered proof of the Titan torturing in human experiments, so David Fujita and his inner circle will likely only be executed instead of being brutally tortured and then executed. David Fujita's inner circle, or at least the ones who'd survived, would likely get as harsh a punishment as him. Most of the lead scientists on the program were determined to be killed by the abominations. To Maren's knowledge, the only one who'd survived was the lone scientist in the room with the baby Titan. Maren hadn't been privy to any interrogations the man had incurred, so she knew nothing regarding how he survived while everyone else had died, how he'd gotten involved with the program, or even his name. Not that it should matter, in the end he'd face his punishment. Finally, a morally corrupt scientist was facing payment for the twisted things he'd done. If only that could be true for all those who desecrated beautiful things in the name of progress. Maren shook her head. Now her thoughts were heading towards dangerous territory.
It's hard to believe that David Fujita was funding terrorists,
Maren whispered, hoping to take herself out of her own head. Unofficially. He wiped the Rise file clean before I finished downloading the information about the experiments.
Was that all that happened up there?
Basically, yes. I'd wanted to interrogate the CEO further, but he never showed up. I saw him coming up the elevator, but something must have distracted him before he reached me. In that time, he got rid of what I hadn't already downloaded. Coda's demeanor never changed. Bringing in a heretic who'd harmed a Titan was a big deal, but mostly for the church. The peacekeepers would have promoted Coda several ranks if he'd given them a terrorist fund supplier, as well as hidden locations of terrorist bases. Yet he talked about that failure as if he was discussing the weather to a stranger on the train. Regardless, count yourself lucky, Coda said. This bargain the governor's office is giving you is a good one.
Unhelpful, Maren said. It would have been a great start saying my first win was against a frickin' scientific monster.
Now, the most I can say is I aided the kidnapped people after they were brought to the hospital.
But now you do not have to come back for court. Trust me, it's the best you pretend you weren't involved in this. Not that it was surprising for the government to offer this deal. Despite the governor's office and several peacekeeper majors working to keep this investigation non-existent until after the day's festivals, they were now trying to claim all of the credit. But why had they been so determined to keep everybody away from this case? That would have to be investigated later. Right now, it looked like they had something else to deal with as a nurse approached them.
You may visit your friend whenever you want now,
The nurse said.
His readings show that he's waking up. But I'm sorry, Holy Wave Leaper. I'm afraid only our venerable ethereal leader may see him. That's fine, thank you,
Maren said. Then the nurse left. I assume you have a few more things to say to or ask me, Coda said.
2 things, Maren said. What'll happen to you guys? You disobeyed direct orders.
Technically, we saved a civilian. We just so happened to save 23 more and uncover illegal activities in a corrupt company.
Won't the peacekeepers see through it?
Most likely. They won't care. Especially not our cohort.
So,
Maren's knuckles clenched.
You both will go back to them?
That was never a question for me, Coda said. Mav's a different story.
I don't think he'd leave without you.
Mav's a little slow, but he isn't truly dumb. Most importantly, he's a good guy, and he actually wants to do good. He has known for a while the peacekeepers aren't for him, but he stayed because he figured that was where he could do the most amount of good across all the country.
But he has a different option now, doesn't he?
Maren tried to keep her hopes in check. This was by no means a confirmation. However,
Then tell Mav to come to the park near the hospital at 10 tomorrow morning, Maren said. If he wants to make history and become the vice president of Talem's first traveling guild.
Coda actually smirked. I'll be sure to do that. And the second thing?
If we ever work together again, and you want to use me as bait, let me know beforehand,
Maren said.
I wouldn't have fought so hard, and I could have been a better help to Mav and the civilians.
Coda eyed her, as if evaluating her yet again. What makes you say I?
You said you couldn't see in the basement because of spatial tech, but then accurately said the number of people and monsters coming after us. Then, after you got what you wanted, you waited an awfully long time to tell me the monsters and Sekko thugs were close to me. Also, why was Mav so far away? Why did it take him just enough time for me to be thrown in with the civilians before he knew where to go to?
Coda didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. There was no shame in his stare.
So, if we ever see each other on the road and we work together again, we'll have a different dynamic, Maren said. I'll be a partner, not a pawn.
I'll consider it. Then Coda entered Mav's room. Maren grumbled. Guess that was the best she could expect from him. Now, however, it was time to find a place to sleep. She had already woken up much earlier than she usually liked today, which was tiring enough. But after all this, despite only being 8 in the evening and long before her bedtime, she was exhausted. And she needed to be rested. Tomorrow would be a very important day.
Thankfully, Mav wasn't left alone with his thoughts for long after he woke up. Worry and anxiety about Maren and the civilians flurrying, Mav nearly tore his comfy covers off, hopped out of his warm bed, and ran through the halls demanding answers. Then Coda visited him and gave him all of the details. "Thank the flames," Mav whispered. "Everyone's all right."
But how are you? Coda asked.
"Oh, I'm great. Did you see what I did?"
I was at least 30 floors above you.
"Oh, right. Well, did you feel it?" Coda smirked.
I did.
He grew somber once more.
But I'm serious, Mav. No bullshit. No more lying. How are you feeling?
"I'm great."
Then why's your head itchy?
Mav's arm was at the back of his head, his loose hair threaded between his fingers. "Damn it," Mav whispered. Coda stood at the foot of Mav's bed, arms folded. "Talk." "About what? I don't even know what I'm feeling." "I don't need to see your tick to know that's a bald-faced lie. If there's anyone on this sunken country who knows what he's feeling, it's you." Mav gripped his covers. "But if there's anyone who stubbornly fights those emotions to put on a brave face, it's also you," Coda said. Mav clenched his eyes shut. "I want to help people." "I know." "Why wouldn't my government? Who's supposed to protect its people? Let me do that? Why did everyone have to work so hard just to save innocent people?" "You know why. Because the world wasn't fair. And while there were good people in power, there were plenty of others who were only in it for their selfish gain." Mav choked. A tear dropped onto the blanket. "If I'd gotten there sooner, then that Titan..." Coda sighed. He walked to Mav's side and gripped his shoulder. "Only pain and torment were keeping that poor thing alive. You gave it peace. Its last moment was one of bliss. You gave that to it, Mav. And the people responsible will suffer. I give you my word." "Thank you." "But if we only had followed orders, that couldn't have happened. And we, as peacekeepers, can't make a habit out of disobeying orders. At some point, it wouldn't be excusable and we'd face the penalty." "But there's nothing else I can do. I couldn't even be a gauntlet challenger. No one will accept a deserter." "One person will." Mav's voice caught in his throat. "But we just met her." "You're right. A quirky young woman who just so happens to be trying to form Talim's first traveling guild. Right when we get discharged and have a whole week to think about our commitment and future. My parents wouldn't like it." "When have they ever not supported you?" "I can't just leave our siblings." "We all know who you are, Mav. Most are surprised that you stayed for this long." "How can I always be around if I'm not around?" Coda took a long breath that morphed into a chuckle. "You and Thomas have been there for most of my life. At least with you going, I can imagine all the incredible things you'll do." "But you don't want to see me do them?" "My imagination is enough." "Your imagination sucks. You always told the worst stories around the campfire." "All of my stories were real." "Exactly!" Coda's dark eyes sparkled, but he turned away and started toward the door. "You need to rest. Maren will be at the closest park at 10 in the morning. I'll wake you up earlier to take you shopping for some supplies." "Then come with me." Mav knew it was a pointless request, but he had to try. "You know I won't leave," Coda said. "I don't have the same hiccups as you do about this organization. This is the best, the only place for me." "It doesn't have to be." Before leaving, Coda faced Mav. "You haven't always just been around, Mav. You were always where you needed to be. Now, you need to be somewhere else. And that's no longer by my side." Try as he might to deny it, Coda was right. Doubt had plagued Mav's conscience since they were sent to burn down Initsu, that small village in Messer. But he'd fought against it for so many reasons, all of them valid, until now. "Can I at least use your comms to call my parents?" Mav asked. "Might as well hear from me how much of a disappointment I am."
Maren sat on the bench she'd rested on yesterday. When she and Coda plotted while Mav worked out, had all that really only been a day? It felt more like weeks ago. It didn't help that this was the second day in a row that she woke with the sun. Maren was strictly a get up at the crack of noon kind of gal. So why hadn't she been able to sleep the way she preferred? In today's case, it definitely couldn't have been nerves. Why should she be anxious? She only had the possibility of acquiring her first guild member. which would put the odds of her traveling guild becoming a real legitimate organization much higher. And it wasn't like that one potential guild member might be too strong-headed or terrified about leaving behind everything he trained for these last 2 years and be branded a style of traitor for the rest of his life, all so he could follow a stranger. But he still wasn't in the park. Breathe, girl. Maren checked the time. 20 minutes to 10. He still has time. Hey! An excited voice called out. Maren turned, her hair swinging over her shoulder. Her delight morphed into confusion as a blonde man wearing a blue cloak ran to her, waving. It was the traveler from the day before, the one who'd given her the request that led to all yesterday's chaos. "I've been looking for you everywhere," the young man said, slightly breathless.
What are you doing here?
Maren asked. "Well, I was on my way to travel near you, like I said," the man said. "But I realized that I didn't know how to pay you the rest of the money when you completed the job."
So you came to the city and what? Been running around looking for me this whole time?
Kinda, he laughed.
You could have seen recent transactions and then sent another one to my address.
His eyes widened. "That's a thing?" Maren nodded. "Whoa! Learn something new every day, right? But how would I have known if you had finished the job?"
Could have checked the news. It's everywhere now. Not that I can take credit for it. Oh, by the way, don't tell anyone you hired me for that job.
Okay?
And while we're asking questions, why didn't you tell me about the missing persons yesterday? That would have been very useful information to have.
What missing persons? Maren blinked.
23 people were kidnapped over the last week.
They were? Maren's jaw slackened.
How did you survive a day out on your own?
The man puffed out his chest. "I'm really fast."
I recall.
He tapped at his wristband. "Hey, what do you know? I can just send credits to you. How convenient. Here you go." Maren checked her tablet. 800 more credits have been added.
This is a lot more than what you gave me before.
"It was a bigger job than I expected," he said, smiling. "Did you see? A whole street basically got destroyed."
I was kinda there.
"Oh, right. Anyway, share it with your guild members. This was a job you couldn't do alone, right?"
Right. So it's lucky I ran into some help. But they're not exactly my guild members.
The man furrowed his brow. "Then who's that?" Maren turned. At first, she didn't recognize him. She'd only seen him prim and pristine in his neat uniform and pulled back hair, or haggard and frozen near death. But his long, shaggy hair falling into his face and sticking out at many angles, wearing cargo shorts and an unzipped red sleeveless vest with a horizontal black line near the bottom, proudly displaying his flame dancer tattoo on his muscular left arm, his chiseled abs and pecs gleaming in the morning sun, and holding what looked like a gym bag over his shoulder, Mav strolled up to her. He waved and beamed when he caught her eye.
He showed up.
Something tingled in Maren's stomach. She found herself smiling, and for some reason, her face grew quite warm. "Thanks for everything," the blonde man said. "I'll leave it to you." "Who's that?" Mav said as he approached. Then he glanced down at himself. "Is something wrong?"
Oh.
God, Maren had been staring.
No, nothing. Sorry. This man's the guy who gave me the first contract about those...
She turned, but the blonde man was gone again.
Experiments.
Mav whistled. "That guy's fast."
So he is.
They stood there, the only sound coming from the wind and more cursed pigeons. It was only then that Maren realized she never had a full one-on-one conversation with Mav. All their direct interactions had been either through coda or during heated moments. How well would they communicate with each other? "Are we supposed to do something?" Mav asked.
I don't know, Maren said. To be honest, I'm surprised I got this far. But I guess something formal and official sounding is in order.
She leapt onto the bench, one foot on its back.
Are you ready to create the most epic of adventures and surmount great challenges?
Yes! Mav shouted, pumping his fist. She adjusted her pose, leaning forward on her knee, her foot pressed against the bench's armrest.
To undergo the same legendary feats written in tales of old and inscribe our names alongside them?
Yeah! Maren leaped to the lowest branch of the nearby alder tree and swung up. Thank the Lord she kept her balance.
Will you give life and limb to protect your family and the innocent who count on us?
You know it.
Then welcome, Mav, to Talim's first traveling and soon-to-be greatest guild that will at some point have a name. With a flourish, she swung her blanket off and threw it into the wind. As Mav cheered, it thankfully touched down next to him. She hopped down from the branch and put the blanket back on. A chilly breeze rolled in and she needed the warmth.
That was awesome,
Mav said. Just wait until we're actually official, Maren said. We only have about 30 more days to get a third member.
It'll be fine. If I could be convinced, we'll easily get someone else in no time. Excitement swirled in Maren's chest. It finally happened. She acquired a member. It took a long, painful day to do it, but it happened. Maren's dream and subsequent mission was soon to be realized.
You're right, Maren exclaimed. But now that we're here, I guess actual introductions are in order. I'm Maren Daly, ex-Radiant Dawn Guild member, Wave Leaper, and now leader of Talim's first traveling guild.
Mav grinned. I'm Mav Ito, ex-peacekeeper, flame dancer, and I'm really excited to travel with you and help people. Maren returned the smile.
Then let's get this adventure started.